And we are live. Good afternoon, or should I say cheerio to all our folks watching over in the UK. Finally, we get a show for the people over in the UK. I have a guest who's from there. That's why we're doing it at this hour. My guest is Bruce Fenton, and Bruce, not to be confused with the other Bruce Fenton. Apparently, there's two Fentons that come up here on. If you just search for Bruce Fenton, you'll find this guy. I guess he's a running for Senate right now, and he's a blockchain CEO of Chainstone and an expert on Bitcoin. So if you're looking for Bitcoin advice, that's the guy you want. That's the Bruce Fenton you're looking for. And if you're looking for UFOs and aliens and conspiracy stuff, this is the Bruce Fenton you're looking for. So make that distinction when you're searching Bruce R. Fenton. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I would rather people were not looking for me to give them any advice on cryptocurrencies. So that's definitely an important distinction. Yeah, thank you for having me on. Yeah, look forward to having an interesting conversation on technosignatures and anomalies and all sorts of related stuff.
Yeah, so tell us, you guys sent me a paper here, and that's linked to in the description of the video. Still getting that echo, man. Yeah, it's only when his headphones are we almost got to switch to headphones. I have to mute him while I'm talking. So if I can just remember to do that, I can get rid of that echo and unmute when it's time for him to chime in. So but this is I'm trying to find your website now. It doesn't look like it's being super cooperative with loading, but let's get this one up. The Tektite Mysteries. And this one didn't find either. The Sci-Hub link he sent me. So, could find that out. So I'll bring this paper up. This is a good place to start. And I want to give you the floor mostly. So I'll turn my mic off. That way we won't get the echo. And I'm just going to let you have the floor. Do you have a screen to share too, Bruce? No, I can't hear you. I don't know what's going on with your mic.
Oh, sorry, I had it muted for a moment. I have got images I can use, so where they might be helpful, like Tektite pictures and whatnot. If it seems useful, I might share the odd one. But you can see a Tektite example there for anyone that's not familiar with what they are. Essentially, although that's a kind of a top side of what's called a Australite button Tektite, and they come in a number of different morphologies. So you've got, see there, what's called splash form Tektites. You can see that's like a peanut shape, teardrop shapes. They also come in discs, spheres, and the Tektite buttons, and that's a button. That's the back of a button. The buttons are really one of those interesting forms, and I'll come to why. But so you've got I think it's about 6 different shapes in all. There's dumbbell shapes as well. Those, yeah. So that's a really good image of a button Tektite. So you can see that there's something peculiar about it. Have all the different kind of glasses. The man-made glasses. That's a really odd-looking one. And so you can imagine that from the first encounter with these, out particularly in Australasia, where most of them are found, that people were kind of captivated by them. The Aboriginal people, they felt that they were special, and they are associated with like Aboriginal sort of shamanic practices, healing, and magical practices. In China, there also are Tektites from the same event, and they have been used in kind of Chinese magic and all sorts of stuff. So they have a kind of implicitly interesting look. So you can imagine someone finding one of those and thinking, like, how the hell is that, shaped? What has happened to cause that? And that's really where the interest in Tektites began. Well, this particular type is Australite Tektites. There's 5 major strewn fields, and we say a strewn field is a field of debris in which the glassy material is very similar. Now that's the Australasian strewn field. It's absolutely enormous. As anyone can see there, it's essentially about, from what I understand, 20% of the Earth's surface has examples of Australite Tektites. So you can see stretching all the way from Madagascar there out to well beyond Papua, and then from Indochina right down to Antarctica, where you have some in northern Antarctica. So this is an absolutely enormous debris field. Right, and there's also, there's examples of tektites found in the ocean. We can see where those marks are. Those are where there's been core samples taken that have found additional, usually micro tektites. So these are tektites that are under like a millimeter across. So those ones are usually found in ocean core samples. Up in Indochina, you've got examples of around up to 25 kilo pieces of tektite glass from this strewn field. So that's really big, really big chunks. And that's called Muong Nong layered tektite. And that's actually has layers in it. So you can see the material has been folded during the heating event. So that's a kind of another distinct form. And then most of that strewn field is splash forms. And you have down in southern Australia, across most of southern Australia, you have the buttons. You have a few of those also in Java, amongst what they call the Javanites. So that's the kind of spread, and where you find the different kinds of Australasian tektite glass. Now I should backtrack a little bit. So the tektite glass is an unusual kind of glass. Obviously, it's usually assumed to be a natural glass. I mean, we'll get to why. I have some questions about that designation, but it's assumed to be a kind of natural glass. It's most similar to volcanic glasses and human-made artificial glasses for a number of reasons, which I'll explain, but it's not very similar to the impact glasses that you find at asteroid impact sites. Why is that important? Well, it's actually claimed to be an impact glass. So here you can see some examples of sort of impact glass forms. And usually what you have is, well, first you can see the shapes are more rough. Also, you will find that there's a lot of bubbles in impact glasses normally. And that's because if you imagine an asteroid coming in, hypervelocity coming in, hitting into any area of rock, it will basically melt the rock at the immediate site, evaporate some of it, and you'll have glassy material thrown out. Glass will be found in the crater, around the crater, usually up to about maximum of about 400 kilometers from the crater maximum, right? And that glass, because it's formed in an instantaneous event of very high heat and pressure, there's also quite rapid cooling. So you get a lot of bubbles in it. So it bubbles up, it's foamy, and then it solidifies. You get very little loss of water as well, because there's not much time. And you'll find inclusions, so like organic material and part melt. So partly melted stone or pieces of stone that aren't melted will be included in these glasses from impacts, right? So I think most people can kind of understand that. Again, it's very similar to nuclear blast glass. So if you have a nuclear test, again, it's a very short-lived, high-energy, high-pressure event. So you get the trinitite, which, again, you can see here, it's very bubbly. So you're looking, you see that you can see where these bubble chambers have broken open, right? And so there isn't the time for it to become homogeneous, which is, well mixed throughout chemically. And there also isn't the time for these bubbles to fully leave and what we would call the fining process to happen. So when we make an artificial glass, like the drinkware that we use in our homes, there is what's called a fining process. So over a period of time, maybe hours, the glass is heated in the, in the kind of the vats, and is allowed to bubble off the chemicals that are quite volatile. They will be removed. You can also heat out, obviously any sort of gases, they will come out from this material, right? So whatever you're using, the silica and the other materials. So you then have this homogeneous glass, which is well mixed over time, so that the chemical distribution throughout the glass is very equalized, and you have again, glass has been fined of all of its bubbles and volatiles, but that's done over time. Now, for artificial glass, we can understand how that happens. We are heating it artificially over a period of time, and making it like that. With volcanic glass, that's happening in the calderas. So again, you've got hours or days where the volcanic rock is being heated. And so when we have obsidian glasses, those have been well fined and homogeneously mixed because they're in a caldera being like superheated for an extended period of time, right? So those are the two distinct types of glass that we have. Really, is these kind of the understood prolonged heating glasses, where we have obsidian and human-made glasses, and so we can see why those end up being well fined and have a lot of volatiles have left the glass. And then we have, as I say, the impact glasses and the nuclear blast glasses. So they're in two quite distinct categories, right? The oddity here then is the Tektite glasses, because Tektite glasses are argued by the current consensus theory to be a type of impact glass. Particularly, they are considered to be what's called a distal ejector. So the ejected material that travels furthest from the crater. And they are then assumed to have been formed in a very short-lived high-energy event, as the other impact glasses are. So this is a problem, because the thing you notice about the Tektite glass, as with the obsidian glass, is that it's very well mixed and it's very well fined. And so across the vast Australasian strewn field, you'll find that the chemical composition and isotopic ratios in the glasses are very similar. They're not absolutely identical across the strewn field, but they are very close. Also, the fining of the glass is very notable. There's very few bubbles. There is almost no water. The water is at far, far lower levels in the material than earth rock, or even in obsidian glasses and artificial glasses. That the water is almost completely absent, and that is quite extraordinary. There is no sign of inclusions or part melt. So all of the material has been initially melted to liquid and has then been fined, it's become very homogeneous, has then frozen. And then you have, with some pieces, this secondary melting, which you can see here in an example of a button tektite. So we know that initially all of the material was reduced to liquid glass, and then later on, some of the pieces were then heated again, and we know these were heated again by aerodynamic forces. So we can see this is showing us here the direction of flight. The forces are acting upon what is initially a cold sphere of glass. And so you have the liquid begins to run back, and it forms this kind of the flange, and you have these flow ridges. Bubbles form and pop in the surface, and you have at the back these, what you can see, are the flow bands, bubble pits, and etching. So this is what a tektite button actually is, and why it has that strange distinctive shape, because you can see now this is formed because it's entering the upper atmosphere. And this was something that really stood out to scientists as we moved into the era of the rocket program, and they noticed that these tektites were clearly shaped by aerodynamic forces. And so that was kind of a radical change in the story. I'll just say as well that tektites have been of interest to people for about 200 odd years. There's been different theories on how they formed. So there's been a long time of different academics and independent researchers looking into this topic. It's considered a kind of a mystery in some respects, that's pulled in people from geology, chemistry, physics, all kinds of disciplines, because elements of the mystery are important in those particularly in those research areas. But then eventually, in the early sort of 40s and 50s, as we moved into an era where rocketry became kind of obviously important, and the space program was on its way in, they brought in these guys who noticed that the buttons were aerodynamically shaped. And so they started to be able to look at, experimenting with glasses to see if they could replicate this. As it's noted here, it goes back as far as 1897. You had people kind of writing on the topic. Some of the initial theories were that the glass had been possibly made by a lost ancient civilization, and that had been, was actually an artificial glass. Others suggested that perhaps there had been dust clouds hit by lightning, and that this was a kind of a fulgurite, and that had formed with intense heating from lightning blasts. There was some speculation that it could have been material from a glassy asteroid glancing the atmosphere and showering down some ablated material that rained down. So, and there's a long list really of speculative hypotheses, everything from dark matter interacting with material to, as I say, to these kind of artificial theories. I can't go for the whole list because it's a bit long, but there's a lot of different hypotheses that were thrown at this.
There's another one on here on Wikipedia. It says a Dutch geologist Roger Dietrich Marius Verbeek suggested the extraterrestrial origin for tektites, and he proposed that they fell to the Earth from the moon in 1897. So.
Yeah, and the moon hypothesis became very popular actually once the guys, particularly from NASA, got involved.
John O'Keefe.
Yeah, John O'Keefe and Chapman, and also a name that some people at your channel might be familiar with, which is Povenmire, because Povenmire is a friend of the, going out of my head now, family that had lots of UFO and paranormal events happening, allegedly. I'm trying to think of the name now. It's gone out of my...
Not the Bledsoe.
The Bledsoes.
Okay.
Right. He was a personal family friend of the Bledsoe family as well. But he wrote a book on UFOs and was an expert on tektites. And I would say that I actually tried to contact him, and unfortunately he died a couple of days after I contacted his family, which was kind of like a bit ironic as well as a bit sad, but because he would have been a person I would have thought would be uniquely in a position to have a conversation with me about some of my theories. But these guys, mostly were NASA folks, right? And they got involved because they could see that these pieces had been shaped by entry into the atmosphere. And there had been these previous theories that this had an extraterrestrial connection. And now, when we say extraterrestrial, we don't mean necessarily technological, just that they'd come from space. And so the guys at NASA replicated formation of tektite buttons in like wind tunnels and in also experimental kind of facilities. I think a lot of it was at the NASA Ames Research Center. And so what they found is that the only way to explain the formation of the buttons is that you had to have had the parent body essentially superheated to glass in a vacuum, and that then these droplets had formed. And if you think about it, a droplet of liquid in a vacuum will take a spherical shape, right? So you have these small spheres that have ablated or have come away from a parent body, which must have been glassy, and that then they have frozen very quickly. Where would that happen? Well, space, right? So they were looking at, they could see that the formation process matched well with something being superheated in space, in a vacuum. And then these small droplets, these spherical droplets, had then come into the atmosphere at very gentle angles, essentially almost horizontal to the Earth's surface, i.e., what would be really orbital paths. So the look was that these would be decaying orbital paths. So if you imagine there's a swarm of these droplets, these spherical droplets, that are now coming in, and they're glancing across the edges of the atmosphere. And some of the evidence in the bubbles, the small bubbles that are in some pieces, suggest they sort of bounced along the edge of the atmosphere, up and down a little bit, and then they came in at these shallow angles. And as they did, the front edges began to heat. And they actually heat to about 2,400 Kelvin in the process. And so you get this gradual heating, and that allows the front edge to melt, liquid to run to the back, and then they would come in, and the ones, they've fallen all across Oceania, and obviously we've seen all the way down to Antarctica. So this is interesting because if an asteroid, say like let's say meteorites, when they come in from space, they come in at extraordinary speeds, first of all. And actually, the speed that is calculated for these coming in, I should say, is about 10 kilometers per second, right? So somewhere towards the speed required to exit Earth's gravity, but not quite, right? But if you imagine a meteorite coming in, a meteorite comes in at much faster than that, right? Considering a lot faster than that. And what happens is, as the meteorite comes in, the surface is superheated to liquid, but it's so superheated it just bubbles away, right? It's boiled away. It passes through the atmosphere, it hits the ground, and what you have is the inner core is essentially quite cool. So the outer surface has evaporated, and the inner part is quite cool and solid, right? Because it comes in so fast. There's no time for this melting process where liquid runs to the back, because that you need an extended period of flight for. And so they could see that these hadn't come in directly at steep angles in the way that meteorites come in, right? Or at the speeds. These have come in quite relatively slow, and these angles horizontal to the plane of the planet, right? So in other words, they are coming in on orbital paths, right? And that straight away is an oddity, because then of course the NASA guys are like, well, that's what you see with a satellite breaking up, right? Because you'd have pieces of the satellite are following the path, the orbital path, and they're glancing along the edge of the atmosphere, and then coming in at these kind of quite steep angles rather than sharp angles. They're coming in and glancing along and then falling down through the atmosphere. So that infers a parent body that is a satellite. Now, of course, going back to the 50s and 60s, when people were trying to think of, I say people, mostly NASA scientists, they were trying to think of what satellite, where could this parent body be? Where could this material be coming from? And of course, they settled on the only Earth satellite that we had at the time, the moon, right? So, well, this should have been the only thing, the only object orbiting the Earth 788,000 years ago when this rain happened. There shouldn't be anything else up there, right? So the moon offers the kind of angles of entry that they were seeing. So in other words, if an object was to impact the moon, so you have, say, like a fair-sized asteroid impacted the moon, that this glass formed there and was thrown out into space, travels from the moon, and then glances along the edges of Earth's atmosphere and comes in at these angles. It made sense. And they're like, well, that's the most parsimonious answer to the mystery. And so from most of the sort of mid-50s onwards to about 1970, the lunar origin hypothesis was really, doing very well. It had a lot of support. There was the other argument was, there had been an impact on Earth and thrown material out. But the lunar impact hypothesis was gaining a lot of support. And as I say, there was a lot of NASA scientists involved, so, very credentialed, highly respected people that certainly knew a lot about the angles of entry and, the nose cone designs that used to come in the atmosphere and how this relates to the tektite shaping. So it was all going along very nicely for them until, of course, they retrieved material from the lunar surface. And then what they found was that it didn't mesh with the chemical composition of the glasses. The other problem is that they found that volcanic activity on the moon ceased a very long time ago. And what they were expecting was this to be some kind of lunar volcanic glass that had been hit and then had thrown out into space. And so you'd have needed lunar volcanic activity in the last million years to explain this, because these tektites, the Australasian tektites are 788,000 years old. So they would have had to have formed somewhat recently in a volcano and then been displaced. And so once they realized that those two factors were problematic, there didn't seem to be any lunar volcanic activity, and the surface of the moon lacked silica in particular, but there was a lot of the issues with the chemical composition. But essentially, there wasn't enough silica in the surface material of the moon, that they had to kind of accept a defeat, that there's no way really that these tektites had come from the moon, right? So what happened there is they kind of admit defeat. But the way I look at this, I'll describe this, is it's like, if you imagine there's two boxers, they're slugging it out, and then one of them has a heart attack and dies. So the other guy's like, I'm the champion. Okay, you're the winner, right? But not because you were the best, not because you won the fight. It's just the other guy has died, he's collapsed. And that's kind of the way I look at that theory becoming the impact hypothesis on Earth becoming the dominant theory, right? It didn't answer all of the anomalies. It didn't outcompete the lunar origin hypothesis. It's simply that they realized that the chemical composition of the moon didn't fit and they had to abandon it. But as they did so, they said, well, look, if you're going to say that a terrestrial impact, an asteroid hitting somewhere in Indochina, caused this strewn field, you've got a lot of anomalies to explain that we can only explain by the extraterrestrial hypothesis. For example, as we touched on already, the homogeneity of the glass, the finding process, which are all unlike impact glasses, the distribution. I mean, you look at this enormous distribution, right? Something that a lot of people don't quite realize is if you have an impact of an asteroid, no matter how fast, no matter what angle or what size, the material has to travel through air, right? So like when someone shoots a bullet through water, it doesn't really matter how fast you shoot that bullet, right? Because it's compressing the water ahead of it, and it stops the bullet dead quite quickly. Now, there's a very similar process for material moving through the air. So if you have ballistic transfer of debris, so in other words, if it's relying totally on the explosive forces of an impact, the material can travel about 400 kilometers, right? And in some extreme cases, it's argued that perhaps it goes a little bit further than that, somewhere between 400 and 1,000, right? Now, that debris field is over 10,000 kilometers long, right? There is no way to get past the physics of that, okay? Because you just cannot have an impact that throws material from Indochina to Antarctica. That material is going to be compressing the air ahead of it, and within about, as I say, usually 400 kilometers, the forces ahead of it have stopped it. It's pushing that air ahead, it's compressing it, and it falls out of the air. And that's it. And you get a radius kind of spread of material from the impact site, and that is it. So when you get to this incredible distance we're seeing here, it is accepted by all parties that this material has to have traveled outside the atmosphere, right? And that's something a lot of people miss when they say to me, oh, come on, it's just an asteroid impact, Bruce. It says so on all the websites. Okay, tell me how that happens. Tell me how that material travels 10,000 kilometers, as well as distributing all the way along that path. So it doesn't just fly up and fly back down in Antarctica. It's all the way along from Indochina down to Antarctica, right? So all of the leading experts in this field accept that it cannot have been distributed simply through flying through the air after an impact. It has to have somehow gone into space, right? And so there is there's a couple of what I'd consider very exotic hypotheses have been offered for this, but is essentially saying that the atmosphere has to have been displaced around the impact site. So in other words, that all the air somehow was removed for hundreds of kilometers around the impact site, allowing this material to travel through what would be essentially vacuum. And in the paper I sent you earlier, it actually mentions that the amount of air pressure or the amount of kind of atmosphere ahead of it has to be very, very minimal, because even the same forces as a human breath, just you breathing towards one of these tektite spheres during the formation process would destabilize that. Just a breath would be enough to destabilize that. So it has to be traveling through essentially vacuum to form. Okay, so that's a problem, because now we're saying that the air has vanished from most of Indochina, right? All of the air has vanished. Now I imagine it's going to be very inconvenient for everything living in Indochina for a start, but also you've got to explain how that happens, because even with an impactor coming in, yes, it can displace some atmosphere ahead of it for a short period, but there's a shock wave coming in behind it, and then you're going to have a very short duration of that happening. And the other problem is that when these tektites are thrown into the air, remember they're supposed to be traveling at around about 10 kilometers a second. They will leave the edges of where that shockwave is very quickly. So they're going to go into atmosphere. And as soon as they go into atmosphere, they're back to this problem where they're going to be stopped very quickly. So you cannot have them traveling, more than that few hundred kilometers where supposedly the atmosphere has been displaced. And now they're traveling 10,000 kilometers. So this is like a physics problem. It's an aerodynamics problem, a physics problem. And so far, no one has come up with an explanation for how you're going to get around that. So in other words, you need a mechanism for this glass to form in vacuum, right? So we know it had to have formed in a vacuum. It has almost no water content. It has to have had less pressure than someone breathing at it, less air pressure ahead of it. It has to be able to travel, 10,000 kilometers. So there's these major problems we don't see in impacts. In impacts, the glass travels 400 kilometers, falls. The glass is not homogeneous. It's got part melt. It's got organic inclusions. It's got the bubbles. It's an exact match for the crater. And keep in mind as well that there is no crater found for this. There has been a few suggested possible craters, but no one has ever found this tektite in a crater or next to a crater, right? So it's not been convincingly associated with a crater. The crater should be enormous, by some calculations about the size of Ireland. If you're going to start saying that this was a kind of event that displaced 10 trillion tons of tektite, which is about the estimate for it.
And
So
all the
10
air
trillion
over,
tons.
and all the air over that area too.
And all the air gone, it's got produced 10 trillion tons. You've got pieces of tektite that are, as I said earlier, 25 kilos in weight in Indonesia. Those aren't going to have gone very far, right? If there had been an impact, the 25 kilo pieces would mark the impact site, right? Because those are not going to fly through the air very far. And that's, again, accepted. And yet you have pieces of that kind of weight in Laos and down in the Philippines and in a couple of other places, and and they said, well, hang on a minute, you've got thousands of miles apart, chunks that are like 20 kilos. So that would suggest that the impact crater stretched all the way, for thousands of miles between these sites to explain 25 kilo chunks. So hang on a minute. So how can that be? And where's this crater? It should be enormous. It should be thousands of kilometers across by this kind of deduction of looking at these 25 kilo pieces and where they are. Everyone agrees again that those should be at the impact site. Pieces of 25 kilos have to be near the impact site. So where is it then? Also, you should see almost mounds of this stuff at the impact site, right? So you've got 10 trillion tons of it have been displaced all around Oceania. Around the impact area, you should see almost piles of it, vast amounts, and with partly melt. And this crater, being 788,000 years old, would be very young geologically and should be very obvious using remote sensing. And so this has been one of the big conundrums for years and years, is where is this enormous young crater that's supposed to have displaced trillions of tons of this glass, right? So you have these multiple problems.
750,000 years ago, 780,000 is what it said. Right?
Yeah. And consider the impact site for the Chicxulub event, right? That's like 65 million years old, and you can see it. You can see it with visually, with satellites, camera satellites. You can see it as a magnetic anomaly. It's still visible. It's 65 million years old, and we can find it, right? So if we're saying that there was an impact on the same scale less than 1 million years ago, this crater should be absolutely starkly obvious, and yet nobody can find it. They've tried to recently associate Australite Tektites with a magnetic anomaly in Laos. And I've had people say to me, oh, well, they found the crater. Look, there's an article saying it's in Laos. But what they have found is a subterranean anomaly under what is probably a lava field. I suspect that they are right in saying that it probably is a crater, but it's very small. And on top of that, it's known that at the same time, around 788,000 years ago, there was multiple impacts of asteroids that hit in Tasmania, Central America, parts of Asia. I'll come to why the association here, but at the same period as this glass, there's multiple impacts. So it's far more likely a small impactor hit in Laos, because it's just too small. And that's if it is a crater. Again, they have to drill into this lava field and prove they've actually found a crater. But then anyway, it goes back to the same problem. I notice in their paper, they don't deal with the fact that all of these issues I've already raised. You can't just say we found a crater. You still have to go back to, now please tell me how the material traveled into space and rained down for 10,000 kilometers, right? Which is, it's very easy to say we think we found the crater. But when you deal with these other physics problems, and this is one of the things that the NASA guys kind of pointed out, is that a lot of the geologists and chemists and stuff don't really like the inclusion of the aerodynamics data, and the experts are in that, because certainly at the time, the early part of this, They weren't familiar with the aerodynamics of the space program and all that kind of, the calculations that go with re-entry into the atmosphere. Those weren't really geological understanding. And they said that if you look at the way disciplines kind of dislike each other's input, that, they're like, well, we're geologists, we know about geology and we don't need to hear from some NASA engineer, So they said there was always a little bit of a problem between disciplines in these kind of topics. He said, but they didn't necessarily familiar with how you'd come to some of these conclusions, so they don't seem to deal a lot with that. But the reality is you can't ignore the fact that these pieces have traveled in from space. And then you can't ignore the fact that for this material to end up in space, it has to have somehow gone through an anomalous process that has never been seen before in a normal impact. And any of the impacts that we understand, where asteroids have been confirmed, the asteroid material is matched with the glass. You can detect it in the glass. It's near the impact site. You have the impact site, where we have confirmed glasses from an asteroid. It's quite unlike this. I note that, some people have said, could it be to do with, stellar processes and glasses melted in space? But it's really problematic. Because, we'll come to one very quickly on that. Obviously, there's a lot of different arguments about that. But I say it can't be that. There's a number of reasons why. The first thing is, you'd have to find dust clouds, right, to do this kind of stellar explosion theory. First of all, you need dust clouds, vast dust clouds, that are made of the chemicals, right, the components that make up this glass, which aren't there, right? So you'd need to find these dust clouds there, made of all the component materials, which is around 75% silica, 10% aluminium, some various heavy metals, and phosphorus, and magnesium, all sorts of. So you'd need that in a dust cloud. Then on top of that, the problem is, let's say you did have superheating of a dust cloud. Why is it forming these? Why would it end up in this kind of collated, very tight knit grouping of tektites instead of going everywhere? So if there's dust clouds surrounding the sun, that material should be going out in all directions. Instead, what we're seeing here is tight groupings of glass material over areas of the planet. Like if you look at the different strewn fields, there's the one in the Ivory Coast, there's one up in North America, there's the Australasian one, there's one also down in potentially in Central America, which is kind of not been completely agreed. And you have a very tight clustering. Now, if something was raining down traveling from the edges, from the sun, say the surface of the sun, pushing clouds of material towards us, that would rain down all over the planet. I mean, that's just one of the main problems. In fact, one of the issues that was raised with the material coming from the moon, just to, again, deal with this issue about could the glass be coming from space? And when I say from space, way out from beyond terrestrial orbit, somewhere out in deep space. One of the main guys in this a guy called Urey, who was I think he was a Nobel Prize winning scientist, but really acclaimed scientist, point out that if you had tektites coming from the moon, so again this will apply to anywhere out in deep space or beyond the moon, if they are traveling towards the Earth, they will be pulled apart. The cloud will be pulled apart by solar gravity, right? So this cloud has to be astonishingly dense to hold itself together against the pull of solar gravity. And so then if it's heading towards the Earth, you'd have this cloud. Either it becomes very diffuse, it rains down all over the planet as the Earth turns, also goes past the Earth and be orbiting in space. We'd still have clouds of these tektites out there in space. And on top of that, you would have, otherwise, if it is incredibly dense, he said you would see tektites meters deep, for them to arrive to Earth in a dense cloud. They would have to be so condensed that then when they eventually fell, you would have a rain on Australia of meters deep tektites. And so this argument that they come from further than the moon is problematic. The other problem with that is the cosmic ray data shows that there's no evidence that this material spent a long duration in space. And so this is why they had to limit the formation to the Earth-Moon like system, right? Because you can measure the cosmic ray data on the material. So in other words, when an asteroid is circling in the solar system, it's getting hit all the time by cosmic rays. Okay, so you can measure how long it's been in space from the cosmic rays hitting it. Okay, we do that with I think it's aluminium-23, and there's a couple other isotopes, right? So you can look and see that. And so with the tektites, there is a lack of evidence that they have spent a considerable time in space. And so if this was forming out there and was orbiting, let's say there was a solar flare, or there was some object exploded out in, the asteroid belt, and of course something like that, you would see exposure to cosmic rays over vast periods of time as they circled in the solar system before raining down on Earth, right? They didn't. So this is what limited it to the Earth-Moon system. So it can't have come from anywhere beyond that. And again, if this was a cloud of objects coming towards us, they would have become so diffuse that they would have rained down all around the Earth and gone past the Earth and gone out into the solar system and gone everywhere, right? They would still be out there hitting the moon, hitting asteroids, clouds of these things, okay? So there's no evidence of that. There's no evidence that they were ever in a cloud coming through space like that, that they had to have been coming down in orbit very near to Earth, i.e. nearer than the moon. And so there's this issue, because I've had people say before, could it be from some kind of solar explosion? So the answer is no. And also, you then have to say, please show me the cloud from which it is formed, right? Do you see what I mean? So it's like saying, could it come from an unknown anomalous object that there's no evidence for? Well, I guess. But I mean, if we go into that thing of, let's put in theories that have no evidence, I would say that, it's for other people to find evidence for their hypotheses. So I can only provide the evidence for the hypotheses where there are evidence, right? Because you can always just say, could God have clicked his fingers and made the tektites? Sure, why not? Right? Or could aliens just have come along and thrown them? Sure, but I mean the evidence really doesn't support it. The evidence supports them having formed from the superheating of something in orbit nearer than the moon that is made primarily of silica, at least around about 70+% silica, 10% plus aluminium, a range of other components in it, and that this material then has come down in decaying orbital paths across that region. So in other words, the explosive event has happened somewhere above Indochina. And not only that, because we can see that's where we got, and the end of that debris field has happened in Antarctica. And we know that because the Antarctican micro tektites show evidence of the longest extended period of heating and loss of volatiles of all of the tektites found. So we know that this debris field stretches from Indochina, and at its very end is southern Antarctica. So the explosive event has happened above Indochina somewhere. So that's kind of the ground zero. And what we find there is also that these Muongnong tektites, and I just to explain, there's something that's happened that's really helpful for this, is so the Muongnong tektites, I say, is the result of large pieces of tektite coming in, like so very large chunks coming in and exploding as aerial bursts, right? So if you imagine a very large object is exploded in orbit, some of the stuff coming down is big pieces, like a lot of it's these glass droplets, but there's some big chunks. Those big chunks are exploding like nuclear bombs as they come in. These are causing aerial bursts. And so those aerial bursts, they are scorching the ground below them. They're forming kind of like almost like nuclear tornadoes, which will have some vacuum chamber in them as well. And those have melted the surface, folded it, and made these Muongnong tektites. And how we sort of know that is because just this year, a paper came out showing that a comet broke up and exploded over the Atacama Desert. And there's a really good paper on this. I don't know if you want to bring it up, but basically what they found is that across the Atacama Desert, there is a whole mess of this glass. Looks like tektites, but they know it's not tektite glass. It's from an aerial burst, and they have found evidence of it folding and twisting. There's no crater. and they found the distinctive signatures in the glass from cometary material. So the comet never hit the ground. Chunks of it came apart, and there was a series of aerial bursts over the desert. And that desert sand was melted to a melt glass, like an impact glass, but not from an impact. And there's twisting and folding in it. And that twisting and folding is a signature of the Muongnong Tektite glass, the layered Tektite. So in other words, we're seeing exactly the same processes in Laos and in Indochina, where you've got these huge chunks of Australite. We're seeing in the Atacama Desert, where a comet exploded above the ground and folded and twisted the glass in this storm, this fiery storm of aerial bursts. And aerial bursts are like nuclear bombs going off in the lower and upper atmosphere. And so that's a new paper from 2022. I think it was beginning of this year that one came out. And they have found quite a large area of glasses spread across the desert. So that's kind of Libyan tektite glasses also as well is suspected to be probably from an aerial burst. Not absolutely sure, but they think it's most likely from an aerial burst. So we have evidence of what happens when these objects explode in the air. It's really interesting. The one from, the Atacama Desert is really been helpful for me because it kind of proves that we get this distinctive folding of and layering of the glass that we see in Laos. And this is characteristic of aerial bursts. The other thing is that across the Australasian tektite strewn field, there's a number of people, experts in this, and especially people who go out looking for tektites, who have noted that you get clustering. So you might find, say, like hundreds of pieces of tektite in a small area, and then find no more for hundreds of kilometers, right? And so instead of this being an equal distribution of material that you'd kind of expect from an impact, what you find is clustering. And that clustering, again, is distinctive of aerial bursts. Because if you think about it, if large pieces are coming into the atmosphere, those pieces explode, they throw material down to the ground in a fairly kind of small circle, right? So they rain down. So we're not talking about just small pieces all raining in from space. We're talking about large chunks. And these large chunks explode, and then they throw out more tektite. And that's why we have these different types. We have the dumbbells and the teardrops and stuff. A lot of those are going to come from aerial bursts. Because rather than having the button shaping, they didn't pass through the upper atmosphere. And that's why you have, and this has been another thing that's been difficult for academics to explain. They said, well, how can we have some of these tektites are clearly coming in from space, but some of them have clearly formed in the atmosphere, right? That's a problem, because you're saying, again, with this idea of a swarm coming from space. If they were coming from space, they would all be button tektites, right? That makes sense? Because they would all be, because they would all show distinctive shaping of passing through the atmosphere. But you don't see that. Instead, you find a lot of them, and you see here, a lot of them are dumbbell shapes, peanut shapes, teardrop shapes, spheres, discs. Those have formed in the atmosphere. They have spun through air, and these are all spinning on their own axis, and these shapes are all from spin. And so what you have is glass that has formed in the atmosphere and has been thrown out, hot, spinning, and you get all these other shapes. And that's because they're not all coming from space. Most of them are coming from large chunks blowing up in the atmosphere and have formed in air and are thrown through air, right? So again, this explains why we have the distinct forms, why we have the clustering on the ground, why there's no crater. There's no crater because it didn't hit. The material is coming down either as droplets or chunks. There's no impact. There may have been some small impacts. Even the crater in Laos could be from a large chunk that broke through the atmosphere and impacted. That's possible, but the evidence suggests that most of these chunks just exploded. They were. It's almost like a nuclear bomb. Again, I'm saying the strength of these explosions as they come in at these speeds of around about, as I say, 10 kilometers a second. These large pieces, it's a catastrophic explosions, right? So now you've got that happening all the way across Indochina and Oceania. You're going to have these explosions in the air. You've got this rain of material coming in as well as the smaller droplets break the atmosphere. And it's possible that a very large piece of the parent body may have come down in Antarctica. And that's because there is some tentative research saying that an anomaly detected in Antarctica is linked to what may have been an impact of an object on the scale of the object that eradicated the dinosaurs, or at least allegedly eradicated the dinosaurs. So basically several kilometers across, something seems to have gone into the ice, and they think that the crater was about, well, the crater in ice was about 200 kilometers by 200 kilometers. So there's an anomaly dated to 788,000 years ago, associated potentially with a very large something that went down into the ice at the same time as this glass is formed, so dated to the same era. Something massive went into the ice. And I find that really compelling, because if we've got the explosion of an orbiting object over Indochina, the debris field stretches to Antarctica, we know that's the end of the debris field, and then it turns out there's an anomaly associated with a massive something going into the ice in Antarctica, dated to the same time, right? You know, are we talking about the main part of the parent body? Possibly. Otherwise, you've got a really big coincidence that at the same time as this, something is massive is going into Antarctica. Now, there's a big question here of, okay, so what is this? I mean, the first thing is, if we understand now that the physics precludes this being an impact, right? Then if you look at the chemistry and the isotopic ratios in the glass, then you have a problem, because they are not alike to any bodies in our solar system. So no comets and asteroids that are in our solar system, right? They have way too much silica for a start. They have nearly 70% plus silica. The most silica ever detected in a solar system asteroid is 60%. So that, you can say, is basically the cutoff for silica, right? So now you have a parent object that is over 70% silica. So that is not a solar system object. On top of that, the isotopic ratios in it are not conclusive to being, again, to being objects in our solar system. And in fact, some of the isotopic ratios are, not that you couldn't possibly find them on Earth, but they are associated with very rare spots on the planet. He says, so it's like saying, well, so you've got this really abnormal object, there's, you know, all these oddities about it, and it just happens to somehow hit into a really unusual, rare part of the Earth where you have particular chemicals, particular isotopic ratios. Like, hang on a minute, you know, you start throwing in that, you know, you need to have all these weird coincidences to try to keep it as a terrestrial mundane explanation, rather than saying, well, hang on, the isotopic ratios, the chemical components, the, you know, the spread, the behavior, the morphology are all indicating something really strange here. A kind of satellite, a micro moon that is orbiting the Earth, that is made mostly of silica, that has ratios unlike any natural things in our solar system. So what is this? Well, there's only really two options. First of all, it has to be a non-solar system body, so an interstellar object. So this would make it the first ever identified interstellar object temporarily, as in time. We know that there is Oumuamua, Comet Borislav, and now possibly a meteorite that came down in Papua New Guinea in 2014 that are all believed to be extrasolar objects. They're interstellar objects, right? So these are the first 3 ever detected, right? So if you think about it, so are we going to believe that in the last few years we've detected 3 interstellar objects, but there was none before that? Like, it's just absurd, right? Okay, so if we've already found 3, when you start looking for these things, that very quickly we've opened the door, we're starting to look for them, already they've identified 3 of them, that we will have hundreds of these that have not been identified in the past, thousands, tens of thousands possibly, right? So we now understand that interstellar objects do enter the solar system, right? So this is one of the reasons why this wasn't ever hypothesized in the past, because people didn't know of them, people didn't believe in them. You know, this is the problem, you know, sometimes in science, like with, you know, meteorites and asteroids, they weren't accepted until about 300 years ago that you could have meteorites, right? And then, of course, once scientists accepted that, yes, objects could fall from the sky, then it opened up a field which led to us understanding that, you know, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of things that these have fallen. So now that we're starting to look at interstellar objects, we're going to find loads of them. Now, I suggest that all of the tektite strewn fields are from interstellar objects. That is the most conservative conclusion of my work, right? Is that they are interstellar objects. Now, the Australasian tektites, they come from an enormous moon that was orbiting our planet. Judging by the fact that the estimated amount of material remaining now is about 10 trillion tons thrown across Oceania, right? And you've got to think about 90% of the material is being lost in the explosive event, the heating of the tektites as they come in, right? They think about 90% is usually lost. So now you start thinking the size of this object, right? So this is like, I don't know, 1,000 trillion ton object, like circling the planet. Now, this is massive, right? It's a massive object. What the hell is it? It's made nearly of like 70% to 80% silica. Well, that should be a red flag to people that are looking for technosignatures, because we're expecting advanced extraterrestrials to be creating giant silica megastructures, right? Particularly what they call like, Bracewell probe type objects. In other words, vast silica networks. So super intelligences, AI super intelligences. And this is actually a field, that our cutting edge is looking at, the idea that you could have a vast silica network super intelligence, i.e., let's think like moon-sized silica bodies housing almost godlike alien intelligences, like artificial intelligences, right? So what might one of those look like? Oh, let's say a giant silica moon that was orbiting our planet, right? So that's the kind of, when we look for technosignatures, we should be looking for these kinds of things. And I think it's kind of ironic that you will find that astronomers and scientists will look at such signatures as this on distant worlds. They will be looking for something like that far, far away, but miss it here because they don't expect it to be here. There's the bias is that all of these technosignatures are being sought in distant systems, right? So this is a problem, is there is a bias away from looking for technosignatures in the solar system. Now, how does a giant moon end up orbiting Earth? Because we have another problem there, and I've looked at this to see whether it was possible that something of this kind of size, and again we're talking about kilometers across, would end up naturally captured by Earth's gravity. And it's super, super unlikely. It turns out that basically planets like Jupiter and Saturn, they have the gravitational pull to divert comets and temporarily have a comet as a kind of a moon, and then it breaks away, carries on. Earth doesn't. Earth doesn't tend, well, as far as we know, Earth never pulls in any objects like that into orbit. That they will either be a glancing blow as they pass through, and they'll go through gravitational acceleration, they will just pass by, get sped up, zoom off, or they impact us, and they just, they wallop us, right? The idea that this already very strange interstellar object has now entered orbit around the Earth is super, super weird. Super weird. Because, again, you're going through a string of unlikely things. A glassy moon, essentially a glass moon has entered the solar system. It's got these isotopic and chemical ratios suggesting it is from outside the solar system. It's made of a kind of a glass, right? Because we know that the tektites have to be very close to the composition of the parent body, and we know they were already glassy because they haven't had time to be fined and become homogeneous, meaning the parent was already homogeneous and fined glass, right? So you've got a glass moon that is now parked in orbit around the planet. Again, isn't this starting to sound strange? We should be looking at this as an obvious technosignature. Now, my most conservative thing, as I say, is that this is an interstellar object, which is still amazing. It's still radical because so far all of the interstellar objects have either passed us by or maybe are in the ocean. And that's what this 2014 meteorite in Papua New Guinea, allegedly, maybe some pieces in the ocean, and you've got Avi Loeb and his team are looking to dive there and try to retrieve pieces because they said that could be a probe. They want to find the pieces. But at the moment, nobody has any pieces of an interstellar object, or do they? I'm saying that we have loads of it. We have tons of the stuff, but it's just not being recognized for what it is, right? The second point is, if you think about it, if Australasian Tektite is from an interstellar object, probably a technosignature. Again, it doesn't, in a way, it doesn't matter. I don't have to die on that hill, because you can simply say it's an interstellar object, and that is still in a way let's just say, if I was an academic, I would be going for my Nobel Prize, right? Because you'd be like, well, the first person to identify pieces of an interstellar object in the sea, on land that you can test. I mean, that's massive in itself. But if you go to a Technosignature, of course, that's a whole other level. But the other thing is, if those are pieces of an interstellar object, what about the other strewn fields, right? Because we got the Moldavites over in Central Europe. You've got the Ivory Coast Tektites. You've got in GeorGeSETI and BetaSites up in North America. And then you've got a strewnfield, possible strewnfield in Central America, right? So all of those have this signature of being from aerial burst events and being composed in a way that, if they're not from impacts, suggests that they are interstellar objects, right? And it makes some sense, right? Again, like we're saying, if there's been thousands of interstellar objects and we've never really looked for them, we haven't been detecting any of them, now that we should find many of them, right? And so for opening that door, we say, well, look, turns out Australasian Tektites are a signature. What about these others? I mean, they're all weird. There's only like 5 in a 4.5 billion year history of Earth. If they were from normal impacts, why don't we see Tektite glasses at thousands of impact sites? Why is there only 5 strewn fields? Something's a bit weird there. In 4.5 billion years, only 5 like that. And so all of those are characteristic of this. And one of the guys from NASA kind of points out the problem is when you look at, say, Moldavite. Moldavite is probably the best known. Most people have seen the green, glassy material, Moldavite. It's often used in jewelry and used particularly in the occult and in kinds of magical circles. It's believed to have all sorts of properties for that purpose. So I guess a lot of people might have seen Moldavite. But you won't see button-type Tektite Moldavites. And you won't see button-type Tektites in any of the other strewn fields. And as one of the NASA guys points out, well, the reason for that is quite straightforward. These are very, very old. They're millions of years old. So there's been time for weathering to remove evidence of their passage through the atmosphere. So they've been basically eroded away. So you don't see these button types. So it's, of course, we only see them, as we say, in southern Australia and parts of Java. He says probably that there was a lot more of them across the Australasian strewn field, but they've also weathered. Just to answer that one, we say Tektites on the moon. It's not confirmed that there's Tektites on the moon, but there is glasses on the moon. But Tektites are a very particular type of glass. There have been some glass spheres found on the moon, but they seem to be conventional impact glasses. And there's an argument there to say, are some of those from some kind of solar outburst? I think that's possible. But there's no sign so far of a confirmed Tektite on the moon. But I personally expect them to find it there. Because if an object exploded in orbit around the Earth and threw material out in all directions, some of that, I think, would have escaped and gone to the moon. I expect there would be some of this material on the moon. And I know that, I think it was actually, well, one of the guys from the NASA guys, actually, he reckoned that one piece of glass that had been analysed on the moon might have been Tektite. But that's controversial and sort of argued against. But I would expect there to be Tektites on the moon. And more recently, there's been some discoveries of glasses on the moon, which they haven't been chemically analysed, but have been flagged up as anomalous. And I'm hopeful that some of those may be Tektites. If they do find, let's just say they do find an exact match for Australasian Tektites on the moon, that would fit very nicely with what I'm saying, because if this object has exploded and the material is travelling around the escape velocity, some of it should have travelled out potentially could have travelled out towards the moon. So that would fit very well if they do find the same kind of Tektite there, dated to the same period, right? If you find some 788,000-year-old glass on the moon that matches the Australian Tektite stream field, that'd be really cool.
That'd be huge, yeah.
So when we look at that in its entirety, I would say that we have the absolute kind of hand-in-glove evidence that this is a very, very anomalous object, that it has come in from somewhere else, from interstellar space. It is massive, absolutely enormous, kilometers across. It somehow is able to, enter orbit, which if it's going at the kind of speeds we expect from interstellar objects, which is something like 40, 50 kilometers a second is expected for interstellar objects, that this is now, this massive object hurtling in at these speeds, it manages to somehow put the brakes on and go into orbit. Like, what? I mean, that to me that's a struggle, right? That's a struggle to understand how that would do that, as it's a natural object, right? And so not only that, but then we have another problem. How does a natural object, a natural moon, how does it explode? Right? How does it explode?
Yeah, no volcanic activity up there. I mean,
Sorry, your mic is muted, I think.
there's no volcanic activity up there, right?
I'm not hearing you at the moment.
What's going on with my mic?
I don't know why I can't hear you, but
Check.
can you hear me okay?
Check. I can hear you fine, yeah. But I don't know why you can't
Not sure
hear
why I
me
can't.
now.
But as I say, it doesn't make sense that it can explode if it's a natural moon. So we have to have something there that can go critical, that somehow superheats this glassy moon and reduces it to liquid. And there's nothing really in space that should, that should allow that to happen.
What's your best hypothesis on what you think this was?
Oh, hang on. Sorry, my speaker turned itself off. Hang on. Now, sorry, can you repeat again what you were saying?
Go. So
There you go. Sorry, that's my bad. My Bluetooth speaker turned itself off. Can you repeat what you were saying after I said about the explosion?
So I just want to hear your best hypothesis of what you think this is. Let's get into some technosignatures, and then I know there's other types of rocks too that have extraterrestrial hypothesis. They don't fit with the regular geology of the area, like carbonado diamonds. I've talked about them a number of times. They're only two places in the world, Brazil and Central African Republic, and there's a whole extraterrestrial origin hypothesis on how they got there and where they came from. Maybe a large mass fell to Earth 2.3 billion years ago, and carbonados have directional strength that actually can be harder than conventional diamond directionally. So it would be a great material if you wanted to build a spacecraft that's super durable. So yeah, there's a whole interesting theory on that. But what do you think, if this is part of an alien spacecraft or something? What purpose would these materials serve? Because you said that they're mostly silicon.
Yes, silica is the largest component of it, 70 to 80% silica.
Yeah.
So, I mean, from our understanding, again, it's difficult when we only have the sample of one of the Earth intelligence. But we know here that silica is used for microprocessors. It's used for creating computer intelligence, right?
Yes.
Okay, we don't have full AI, hard AI, but we envisioned a future where whatever we get closest to hard AI will almost certainly be living in vast silica networks. So there are other materials that may be better than silica. I've read that there are other materials that may be better, but we can certainly imagine a future where we create intelligences that are housed in vast silica networks. And so if we see that with our own technology, we would expect other intelligences out there to have used silica in their advancement of their technologies, right? So to using silica chips, like silica revolution like we had here, which has allowed us to move into the computer age, that if that has also happened on other worlds, that there's a good chance that they may have created a kind of a space program using artificial intelligent probes and crafts. Because this is kind of the direction where we're going as well. That, if there is another civilization that wants to explore the cosmos, if it's fragile biology like us, it's most likely going to use, like von Neumann machines and Bracewell probes. One of these is the Bracewell Sentinel probe, which is the idea that if you combine the von Neumann and Bracewell theories, that basically you could have self-replicating craft, you can have self-aware craft, you have these silica probes that house an intelligence, that they are kind of the ambassadors for aliens. Also, they're the SETI program. They could search out other life in the cosmos. They're technically immortal, so obviously they don't need to travel at light speed or anything like that, because it doesn't really matter. They're not alive. They just travel. They'll just go rolling along until they get to wherever they're meant to go. The civilization that sent them could be extinct and they would still be running the space program, right? It's that kind of idea that these probes could fill the Milky Way within 1 million years, even at sublight speeds. And that's something that, again, that academics often poo-poo the idea that alien intelligence could reach us, right? Oh, you can't go at light speed and blah, blah. That doesn't matter. Like, if these probes are just rolling along, semi-immortal, right, they can just be traveling at, say, even half the speed of light or whatever, and they can populate the entire Milky Way in about 1 million years, yeah? So, especially if they're self-replicating, you can fill the Milky Way with them. And again, if they're stopping mining asteroids, creating copies of themselves, it could be vast numbers of them. But even if not, the other few things as well, which I find people aren't very aware of, is that stars have a kind of a dance. Stars are moving relative to each other, closer and further away from each other. They're all moving around each other. And there are times when stars pass very close to our Sol, right? We've had stars, 70,000 years ago, a star passed through the Oort cloud, right? So the edges of our solar system. And we know that many stars have passed close to our sun. So if you imagine a civilization is on a planet orbiting a sun that happens past our solar system, they could travel across to visit at conventional kind of speeds, not light speeds, explore our system, have had a civilization here even, have left, and their sun has now moved away, distant from us. So again, there's these things that people don't factor in, that suns can sometimes move close to us, that probes can travel indefinitely at sublight speeds. So there's lots of ways that aliens could reach us. Another thing that's worth noting is that Earth has been detectable as an interesting point of investigation for the last 2 billion years, and that's because of the oxygen signature, and that's detectable from very remote places in the cosmos, right? They can see that Earth has oxygen, which is a clue that Earth has a biosphere. And the fact that if Earth has a biosphere 2 billion years ago, right, and if that was of interest to space programs by extraterrestrial civilizations, so they've had 2 billion years to send probes here, right? I would suggest that 2 billion years is plenty of time for many civilizations to have detected our oxygen signature and have sent probes, right?
Looks like it for an Earth-like planet. We found one, and send a probe out. So
exactly, and that probe, again, the civilization might be extinct, but the probe will eventually turn up. And so we could have had many, many probes come through here and still coming through here because of our detectability from that oxygen signature. It's been so long. And this is another one of these kind of bogus arguments, is that how would aliens know that we were here to visit? That they've just suddenly, they turn up. It just happens to be when our space program's running and all this, and they suddenly turn up from space, and it's so unlikely. And yeah, that is super unlikely. It's much more likely that they would have come long ago and that they would have known about us for 2 billion years. And if you allow for that, these probes, though, they don't have to leave. And that's when you get to the idea of the Bracewell Sentinel probe. And this is objects that are programmed to stay in the solar system and monitor, i.e. like hiding, say, amongst the asteroid belt, or landing, hiding behind the moon, or orbiting the Earth, right? So, and now we're talking about an object that seems to be orbiting the Earth, watching what's happening. And if you are an advanced civilization who watches for the rise of intelligence, watches for the rise of life on different worlds, one of the things you might well employ is a vast network of sentinel probes. And so some of these things could be superintelligences, AI superintelligences, that you just send them there and they act as your representative. So you don't need any contact with that world. You don't need to have some kind of radio contact, because the probe is you in essence. The probe is you. It is your civilization. It is your intelligence, right? It acts as you. and they will do all the contact, the monitoring. It does all of that for the civilization. I would suggest that what we have here is a sentinel, is a kind of a sentinel. But this is a super intelligence. It's massive. It's a massive silica object. It's sitting in orbit. It's monitoring Earth. It happens to turn up at a very interesting time, right before Homo sapiens diverges from Homo erectus and from our ancestors, more primitive ancestors. It turns up right then. And soon after that, there is a divergence event. Very much. A lot of this does remind me of the 2001 Space Odyssey, which I've mentioned in my book for a couple of reasons. Think about it. Black glass, right? The black glass. We see that in the obelisk. We see that, and I have sometimes wondered, what did Kubrick and Clarke know, and when did they know it? Because, in fact, in southern China, a group of early hominins walked into the debris field of the Australite rain. They would have seen the sky burn, and they walked into a plains where this was scattered over the ground. How do we know that? Because we found their stone axes in the same layer as the Australites. And you think about that, that's pretty much the scene. So you can imagine them seeing they're seeing those things lying down across the floor and thinking, what the hell are those? That they've walked into this clearing after seeing the sky burn, and now they find these strange glass objects scattered all over the floor. It's almost the scene from 2001 A Space Odyssey. And we actually now are suggesting that this material is from an AI, and a Bracewell probe. And those were Bracewell probes. The obelisks were Bracewell probes. They're Sentinel probes, right? So this is almost an exact match for what Kubrick and Clarke were showing us when those hominins walked into that clearing and they see the AI glass. They see these silica Sentinel probes sitting there representing an alien race. That is almost exactly what happened in southern China when these hominins walked into this debris field, that they wouldn't have known it, but they were walking into the remnants of an AI, and that these pieces, I can't tell you if they were in some way alive still. Who knows? But did they in some way still have elements of the AI flickering in them? But that is kind of amazing, because you think about that overlap with that story, whether that was somehow just them stumbling on that thought, resonating up from our DNA, or it was purely just a coincidence that they came up with that story, or if some people know about this. And you got to think the connections that Kubrick and Clarke had, some of the people they knew, particularly Clarke, who was very much in that world of the world controllers and the uber elites, with their esoteric knowledge and the lore that they have, right? Makes me very suspicious that some of the elements they use in that story. I know someone as well brought up about the Kaaba, and I do talk about that in my book a little bit, because the black stone at the Kaaba is really interesting, because for anyone who's not familiar, in the corner of the Kaaba you have the famous black stone. There's a little silver sort of engraved area where you have these pieces of black stone embedded, and those are actually suspected to be Tektite. Now, no one's allowed to take them out and analyze them, but the suspicion is that the black stones are Tektite. And that's kind of really, really intriguing, because that whole site has a lot of overlaps with some of this story as well, because it is said that the black stone is associated with an angel and with the Adam and Eve story, and they're supposed to have date back to the time of Adam and Eve, the beginnings of humanity, right? The garden. And it originally was white, and it was turned black during this period by the sins of humanity. But sin turned it black, and then it is associated with the rise of us. And also said there's some stories the black stone could talk and was alive and could somehow communicate with people, right? And think about that again. That's kind of super weird. That's a bit like the 2001 thing. It's a bit like what I'm talking about with this AI craft with its Tektite signature. That somehow there is a remnant in that story that is very alike to this. That did they know that this stuff became black during the explosion, which is true. It wouldn't have been before that. It's blackened by the explosion. Is that the sin they're talking about, the destruction of this AI? And that it falls at the time of Adam and Eve in the garden, where the first humans are about to arise, which is bang on the time that the first Homo sapiens are diverging from Homo erectus. In fact, they've walked into some of this material on the floor, and then we have not long after that the divergence event, and then we have this material that once could speak. If it was AI, then once could communicate. So the whole story around the Blackstone, and obviously the area, they said that before the humans were there, that this area was sacred to the beings that lived before humans, to the jinn and to these other beings that lived before humans, and that there is a springs there that's associated with the seven sisters. There was seven sisters, these kind of nymphs, which is the seven sisters mythology of the Pleiades. And then that's found in many places. That's found down in Australia, that's found obviously in Greece and so. But there's a mythology that it goes back to this time before humans and has a Pleiades connection and has this kind of living material, AI sounding connection. And I'm very intrigued by that. So I talk a little bit about that in my book because that stood out to me. I think between, say, 2001: A Space Odyssey, the story of the Kaaba, there's a lot in there, that both of those, that made me wonder who knew about the Australasian Tektites and this probable AI craft, because there were so many overlaps. It could be one of those cosmical coincidences. I can't say for sure, but it's very intriguing. And again, of course, those black stones have nothing really to do with Islam. I mean, it's only pulled into the story by the Prophet Muhammad kind of suggesting that this is an important site. It's because of his involvement in the story that it becomes a holy site. It's considered to be a pre-Islamic site that was holy to pagan groups that were in that area before any linking to Islamic traditions. So it's quite interesting in that fact that this is a site that's considered to be way older and go back to before humans, right? So that's another interesting side story to this, which I think people should definitely consider. I'm not going to make any absolute conclusions that it is linked to the story, but it definitely stood out to me, the fact that they had all those overlaps with this, that is this somehow people, I would suggest maybe psychically or somehow tuning into this story, or somebody getting what we think of as downloads or remote viewing or something, some way that somebody realize that this material has this cosmic connection and a connection to the human origin story. I'm not sure. I mean, you go of course then into murkier waters where it becomes more speculative, and I can't say that's real, that that's what it's about. What I can say is that the material itself, and again, if that is Australasian Tektite in the Kaaba, that would be absolutely amazing. But obviously we can't get that tested, because no one's allowed to take it out of there and test it. That's absolutely just not going to happen, right?
Or bring an optical spectrometer up, to it or something. I don't know.
You could try. I don't know how it would go down with it. You know what I mean? It might not be worth your life to try. That's what I look at. But I mean, look, if it was to ever be confirmed that those pieces in there are Australasian Tektite, which is not unreasonable to think, it's a massive debris field. People have moved around carrying this stuff, believing it was sacred, believing it was special. It's as far as China, the debris field. Is it possible that somebody took some of it, in the distant past, took it to the Middle East? Yeah, absolutely, it's possible. I argue in other work that I do that the earliest humans in that area go back to Australia. And again, anyone's familiar with my work, the Inter-Africa theory, I make a detailed explanation of why I say that the first people in that area came up from Australia about 50,000 years ago. So if these objects were sacred to Aboriginal people, and Aboriginal people were migrating up into Southeast Asia and on into the rest of the world, could they have been carrying some of this stuff with them? Yeah, absolutely. So there's no particular reason why that can't be Australasian Tektite that's been carried on somebody and taken to that area. I'll just put that as in the back burner of people's minds that this story, there's no reason why that can't be. And the overlaps of the story, again, even that story of the Seven Sisters, the oldest tellings are from the Aboriginal people in Australia of these Seven Sisters and the Pleiades mythology. And so it's funny that the Kaaba site is linked to the Seven Sisters mythology and has this black stone that the Aboriginal people say is extraterrestrial and is magical, and was fell during. Actually, there's a really interesting Aboriginal story on this, which when they were asking them what did they think about these stones, they said, yeah, they were extraterrestrial, and that they had been rained down from space, and that they were the product of the Icemen, and that the Icemen had been trying to kill the ring-tailed possum people, and that this material was from this event, from this what sounds like a kind of a conflict between two groups, and that this was extraterrestrial material that rained down across Australia. How did the Aboriginal people know that that stuff was extraterrestrial and it rained down across Australia, right? How did they know anything about that without any modern scientific understandings, right? But they seem to know about this, right? And so that is entirely possible that that mythology spread into other parts of the world, including into the Middle East. There's no particular reason why not. The flow of stories. I mean, if you think about it, you have the same story of the Orion the Hunter chasing the Seven Sisters, right? That story is oldest in Australia, and yet you have the same story in ancient Greece, right? The exact same telling of a hunter chasing, the Pleiades, right? So if you look up, you do not see a hunter chasing some women. I don't care. No matter how strong your imagination is, if you were to look at Orion and the Pleiades, you wouldn't naturally see it as a hunter chasing some women. So the chances of the ancient Greeks and the Aboriginals independently inventing that mythology is totally unbelievable. In other words, this story has spread from Australia, where it's told first, and has moved across continents, has moved across into Eurasia. As people have moved, they've taken this story with them, because you're just not going to, on your own, come up with that story again, saying, oh, it's a hunter chasing some women. I don't think that's reasonable, because anyone can look at it and you can say, if you just look at those as stars, that's not what you'd see, right? So it takes quite a bit of conjuring imagination to see that. So the fact that the ancient Greeks would come up with the exact same story as the Aboriginals is a little bit beyond belief. So these stories are moving with migrations. Humans are carrying them, right? The same as humans can carry pieces of Tektite, right? So I think that we have a definite high chance of a link in between the site, the Kaaba, and this Aboriginal mythology and these stones. So that's kind of another aside to it. So yeah, I mean, dovetailing back again, I mean, yeah, so I really see this as being most likely a kind of a sentinel, a kind of a Bracewell sentinel that is in orbit around Earth. And when we get to explosive event, I can only explain that explosive event by technology, because a natural body in orbit around Earth can break up, but it shouldn't be able to explode, like superheat and turn to glass, and turn to a glassy debris field raining down in orbit.
Yep.
That's really problematic. What would cause that?
Yeah,
I would suggest it's, some kind of power on board, that something, has gone wrong there, because something has exploded.
Good questions, all of these. So we have a bunch of tektites. You can actually buy these on eBay if you search for tektites or Australites. You can buy pieces of this black.
Yeah,
meteor.
I have some. I've bought some online myself.
Cool stuff.
It is cool. I mean, the buttons are super expensive. I can't afford those. They are super expensive.
They're rare.
They're really rare. You can get the other pieces. If someone's thinking to buy some, the cheapest are those from kind of like Thailand and Laos and stuff. The ones from Australia are more expensive, the Australites. But if you order from from the Southeast Asian tektites and Chinese tektites, they seem to be a lot cheaper than if you order from the Australian ones. So just to keep that in mind. To me, they're all equally important. So, don't feel like, oh, well, I have to get the Australite ones, or something like that. If you accept my argument that these are from an interstellar object, and then even if you don't accept it as being technological, even if you just want a piece of something that came from outside of our solar system, I would say it's well worth you getting a piece of this. Someone said to me as well, if your theory is ever accepted, how would that affect the value of this tektite? It will be worth more than diamonds.
Yeah,
you've got to think about it logically,
yeah.
Innit?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
because,
that's true.
Yeah, because if it's accepted that this is from an extraterrestrial technology, what's the price on tektite going to go to? I don't know, but it's going to be a lot more than it is now.
Yeah.
So I would suggest to anyone who's kind of interested or feels that I'm on the right track, buy yourself a piece, put it away, now, just in case, because, I can't tell you, but if my
Still
work
cool
is
to have,
accepted,
yeah,
you might not
it's
want
a
to
good
buy it
investment.
later if it goes to diamond prices.
Just like I've been telling people, buy bismuth metal. It's gonna go. There's no use
Get
for
things
it
down
right
for
now,
your
but
head.
there's
The
gonna
other thing I
be.
wanted to say is want to raise to you as well. It's again use about other materials that might be, technological extraterrestrial materials. I know you've tackled a couple already, but one that I find really interesting, you might want to bring up is when I was thinking about this, I thought, is there any stories in the kind of ancient mysteries and stuff that might relate to a similar kind of event, like an explosive craft, crystalline materials? And you know what kind of jumped out to me was the stories around the Tunguska event.
Oh
Right,
yeah,
because
Tunguska.
Right, because I was thinking, well, Tunguska, there were some theories back in the day, I think from some Russian scientists who thought that maybe this was an alien craft that had come in and had somehow the nuclear engines had superheated and exploded, right? And they had this kind of crazy sounding theory. And I thought, well, was there any connection between the Tunguska event and glassy type material? And it turns out there is. And if you might find this, there's a Siberian Times article on Tunguska glass. And what they found is that there was this massive chunk of super weird glass. And it's been sitting in some scientist's fish tank for like decades. And they'd found it at the Tunguska site. And when they tested this glass, it turns out to be extraterrestrial. And they said that it's unlike any asteroids or anything like that. And they said, well, it must be from some other object that was there at the time that blew up. But, and if you look for,
Right, they were saying
Siberian
that
Times.
whole collision theory and everything. Yeah. Really interesting
If you
stuff.
add on there, Tunguska glass, Siberian Times. I think that's the one on the left. If you look, those 6 pieces, the green pieces, go back. Sorry. There, that one. Yeah, that's from the article, I think. If you go to that. That's the object, I think. So I don't know if that's the reason, but there was a Siberian Times article talking about. But those are the pictures, I believe. And this stuff is like, it was super weird. And it's that's the one. Was the emerald brought to 100 years? Yeah, like that apparently fell from the sky at the time, and the composition is unlike anything terrestrial. And so they were kind of like, well, what is this? And it was just literally like he says there, it was sitting in some geologist's fish tank who hadn't really thought that it might be anything important. But, if this is a piece of the object that exploded over Tunguska, then what the hell was that object? Because, I mean, look at that. That is obviously not part of a normal asteroid.
Wow. Yeah. Huh.
Right? So what are these weird glassy things that are flying in and exploding in our atmosphere?
Wow.
And I think it mentions in there, somewhere in there, if people want to have a look at that, of course, they can read the article. But it says in it that, it's unlike, that they think that this is extraterrestrial material, and it's not explainable as just, some kind of an impact glass or any normal kinds of glasses.
It's not really a normal meteor type event, and I heard they found a bunch of this glass and stuff out there by the.
It's super weird. You look at that and you think, they know that didn't come from a normal asteroid. Why would an asteroid be made of that? What kind of asteroid is that? And so when I found that, again, I'm like, so there's more of these things then. It's not just the ones that I've kind of identified with the strewn fields. That then this would be a smaller one, so even though the explosive force was pretty intense, obviously it knocked down, it was several 100 kilometers of forest in Siberia, but it would have been no doubt a smaller event. I mean, look at the Australite Tektites strewn field, absolutely enormous, but this was still a powerful event. So whatever it was, it threw off a very powerful blast, and again, these Russian guys. They kind of felt that it may have been the engine exploding or something on a craft, and that, it caused it. It may well have been something like that. I mean, that used to be a really crazy kind of hypothesis. But the more I'm looking at this, the potential that most advanced civilizations' crafts will be living AI, then we should be looking for crafts that are just giant silicon networks and things like that, right? Not for these metal flying saucers and stuff like that.
Or
Because you think
optical
about, those are
computer
kind of a
networks.
primitive idea, isn't it? That there's a couple of guys flying around in his metal saucer with his computer panel. That's really kind of primitive. Like, that's really actually primitive. That's like what we do, like in our airplanes and stuff. But that doesn't make a lot of sense, because that's really wasteful. Because if you can have a craft where the entire body
The
is the
structure and
AI.
everything.
Right, yeah, everything's the computer. Why do a little panel with two guys? That is like super primitive. Like, you can send basically a silica moon, which is entirely the computer and is entirely alive and is basically immortal and almost impenetrable to anything and to destruction, and there's no one alive on board to be injured or anything. Like, when you start thinking about it like that, this is what we should be looking for. And instead, people are generally looking to find metal crafts. And metal also, if something does crash, the metals we understand, they will not be detectable over millions of years. So you're unlikely to find the remnants of ancient craft if they're metal. But silica,
Iron would not last, but if it was made
No.
out of glass or something, yeah.
no, most metal, even if there's some element of it, it would probably be in the geological layers, and we would just think it was metal in the Earth's surface. So we'd be really struggling to say it came from an ancient craft. But if you find like silica glasses, these can persist for millions of years. So if you have a craft made of silica that explodes, you can find the debris from that for millions of years. And that's why we should look for that. Because I'm not saying there are no metal craft, but we would have a massive problem identifying that in the geological record. Right? And that's if they even aren't weathered away. Like I say, most metals, be weathered away. And if it was an explosive event, you're not really going to find the hull. So you're trying droplets of metal that have, gone into the geological layers. I mean, so there's a point where you're going to say, like, how are we going to recognize that was ever from a craft, right? But if you've got debris where you've got, the isotopic ratios, the chemical composition, it's still in that glass that you can do science on, right? And say, well, that's from somewhere else. That's a much better target. And I think that's why we've gone down the wrong path a bit with the idea we're looking for these metals. We look special metals. I'm not saying that they wouldn't be used. I just don't think we could find them in the geological layers. I think we'd have a real problem with that. Whereas these tektites, i.e. any of these glassy materials, silica materials, we can find and are exactly what we expect in terms of these Bracewell probes. And like all the cutting edge scientists are saying, we think, aliens be using all these Bracewell probes. Why aren't we looking then for silica debris? Like, isn't that what we should be looking for? And then when we find it, it's not really getting noticed. It's just, oh, well, a big chunk of weird material in some geologist's fish tank, and it's like, dude, that's probably a chunk from an alien spacecraft, and you've just got it in your fish tank. It's, and we're not, again, it's like the, what I said earlier, like the meteorite issue, where it took a very long time for science to accept that meteorites were real. It was like, I think 1703 or something when they finally accepted that meteorites were real, right? So when people think about that, I mean, that's kind of retarded. And so that's the way science works. At some point the door opens and there's a leap, and it's like, oh yeah, that totally obvious thing we were denying is obviously true. And that yes, meteorites are falling from the sky and they come from space, and oh yeah, let's just do this and go back to normal science again. It's a paradigm shift, right? That's the paradigm shift that needs to happen with interstellar objects and technosignatures. That we need to now have another kind of paradigm shift where we start to look for the signatures of these things.
The other thing is the technology. We're just coming up to understanding some of the quantum physics and the science behind all this stuff, and that's opening up new doors for us with material science to know actually what to look for, because we would have looked at these materials before and not thinking anything of them until we get down onto the atomic scale and can look for things like, oh, is there optical coherence or any kind of other strange optical properties going on inside these glasses. We could tell if they're photonic pieces of a photonic computer or other technologies that we're now just coming of age on.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, absolutely. Like with the we touched on what I said. Like the Australasian Tektite topic really shifted when we started the rocket program, because that's when we started to have people that were doing experiments in wind tunnels and stuff and could understand what shaped these. So again, it's when we have these kind of scientific leaps. A new field opens up, people notice things about old science that was being done and say, hey, I can employ some of what I've learned in my field to this old problem, and then they can help solve an old problem. And that's exactly what happened with these NASA guys entering this field. The only problem, why they didn't start, in my view, look, in a way, like I say, in my view, the NASA guys already identified this material as an extraterrestrial, signature. They didn't quite go to Interstellar or Technosignature, but they understood it was extraterrestrial, right? But the problem was, in that paradigm in the 50s and 60s, nobody would have gone to the, could it be an alien technosignature? So no hypothesis was ever offered that it could be artificial, in terms of extraterrestrial artificial, right? Also, because nobody really believed interstellar objects entered the solar system, nobody looked at it with the hypothesis of, could it be interstellar? If they did, they would have resolved this problem, and I wouldn't be talking to you about it. It just would be common knowledge. It would have been solved in the 60s. They would have said, could this be interstellar material? Oh yes, that totally resolves all the anomalies. That makes a lot of sense. Yes, we've explained it. So it wasn't that the evidence wasn't there. It wasn't that we didn't have the right people looking at it. We didn't have the right framework in their minds where they were willing to test the hypothesis that was outside the box.
Right.
Because the box was too small.
Yeah, well, those hearings a couple weeks ago hopefully opened up that box a little bit. What were your thoughts on? I'm going to switch gears here a little bit.
Sure.
We're past that. We're almost at 2 hours, and man, I was going to let you talk for an hour and then get you on some other stuff, but we just kept going with that. It was too interesting to stop. So let's. What were your thoughts on the whole UAP task force hearings in Congress last week and House Intel?
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it, it's problematic, isn't it? Because the government, they really, I just don't see why they would have any particular genuine motivations to understand this. First of all, it's going to mostly be about where can votes come into this, where can money come into this, where can they personally gain. When we talk about the kind of politicians that are wading into this, so there's a lot of self-interest involved. The military, the kind of military-industrial complex, their interests are, again, is in money, war technologies, control of the narratives.
Defense.
And so on neither side of this do I see people that would have an interest in forwarding the science of anomalous phenomena or even of aliens, right? Because what do they... And this is a problem. I know there's a guy... there's a really good thinker, I'm trying to think of his name, but there's a guy and he's written a paper about this, kind of saying, well, aliens are a problem for the government, right? The aliens are a problem for the hierarchy, because if we say that there's evidence somewhere in all of this UAP, UFO data that insinuates a technology or an alien intelligence is operating in our solar system, right? And it's more advanced than us. It has all this technology, can, bend space-time or anti-gravity. Whatever it has is ahead of us, right? Then it immediately subverts the hierarchy and it takes the pinnacle of the hierarchical structure, right? So now at the top is no longer the government and the military, right? Because what are people going to be thinking? They go, I want to know what the type 3 civilization thinks, right? Because, who cares what the president thinks if we know that there's sitting out there in a spaceship, there's a type 3 civilization that knows everything, right? So it says these intelligences can only be a threat to the hierarchy, no matter whether they're peaceful, no matter whether they're hostile. It doesn't make any difference. He said they immediately are a problem because they take the top of the pyramid for every human being on the planet, right? And so can anyone see the kind of people that are running things wanting us to look at their being and intelligence above them, and who we are actually all thinking, I only care what the aliens think. I don't care what you people think. You're all irrelevant now, right? And he says, so the only aliens they can ever give us is ones created by them that fit into their narratives and into their stories and allow them to control the aliens, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's really an interesting point. That suggests that anything they give us, no matter what they have in the files, it has to be done in a way where they remain in control of the story and in control of the aliens. And so those can't be real aliens then, because you can't control the real aliens if they're there, right? So this would have to be fictional creations. It's because it has to be a story where they don't end up subverted by another intelligence and that their hierarchical structure is threatened. So I think if you go into it with that view at the beginning, you understand that they cannot bring you a disclosure which involves any real aliens. They cannot. It's a too big a risk for them to open that box, that it could destroy their hierarchy. And so that's what I think what we're going to see is, at best, some grandstanding by people, wanting some attention, some glory, some votes. We may see some military contracts, flying around for people that want to get money from this issue. I just don't think we can be given anything legitimate. I mean, on a side note, keep in mind as well, the kind of evidence that I've shared it with you has been in NASA files since the 50s. So are we going to believe that nobody in this organization and nobody in all of this hierarchy has thought, some of this stuff looks like techno-signatures, right? So why is it that I'm having to say this? Why isn't someone from NASA saying, well, some of the stuff in our files, that could be techno-signatures? Like, I'm not buying it.
I
think
people
there's
like
something
us
very wrong.
to come out and stick our necks out first, so that they can come and attack us first, and then once they realize that hey, we're not getting attacked anymore, and there might be something there, then they're all going to come in and steal our work and publish it. And
very likely that's when you start to see people that they're scared for their careers. Certainly with some of the scientists at the moment,
absolutely,
that they won't go there. Obviously, Avi Loeb's is kind of a test case with the Galileo project.
He's a maverick for sure, yeah.
And that's going to be interesting. But, whether or not then if that opens a door to a lot of other scientists at least starting to highlight some of the anomalies in the solar system and in the Earth system. Because there are others. If people are familiar with, there was I'm trying to think, there was a flyby of a mini planet out in the asteroid belt. Do you know which one I think of? There's a mini planet. I'm trying to think what it's called now. Is it not Chiron, is it? No, I forgot. I know one of these planets, there's like a microplanet, and you go through the asteroid belt, and basically there's quite a large object, and what they found there was an area in a crater with a glowing spot, right? And this glowing spot, they suggested, was some kind of minerals that reflect light. Okay. Now, in the glowing spot, you've got...
What should I search for?
Yeah, have a look. Because in the glowing spot, you've got what appears to be geometric shapes, geometric patterns. Put the glowing spot, and if you look in images, I expect you'll probably find this. I'm trying to think which probe it was that went past. No, it's trying the asteroid belt. It's like a glowing spot, mini planet in the asteroid belt, and it's in a crater. I'll also try to find it because it's a really interesting one.
I can't play videos from other sites. Is this the one?
Ceres. Yeah, on the dwarf planet Ceres.
Space Rock 2020 CD3.
No, CERES, Ceres. It was NASA's Dawn spacecraft past Ceres and photoed from space. And what you find is that there is a giant crater, and in the middle of it there is a glowing spot, right? So I don't know if you can find that. So NASA Dawn spacecraft Ceres. CERES. As in, Ceres is the name of the moon, yeah. Yeah, and there's the glowing spot. If you probably find some of the images that they've shown this. And what they've argued is that this is probably just some minerals that are reflecting light. Okay?
Yeah.
Right. But the thing is, when the planet turns and that crater is in shadow, there's images where it's in shadow and it's still glowing. That's the first thing. But then also when you zoom in, one of the things you notice as well is the pattern of them. It looks rather like a solar system map, which is kind of funny. And then also in one of those glowing spots is
Or
a
a stream
geometric
field.
pattern with a square. It's a circle inside a triangle inside a square kind of thing. So let me think if I can get the. If you look for the series, and they did a let's see, series glowing spot geometric patterns.
Interesting, huh?
And yeah, I think it's in it. And so they found what looks like geometry in that glowing spot.
It's called the Occator crater.
Yeah. Series glowing spot geometric shapes. So yes, they found they used AI to scan this area, as well as having a group of people that had no special skills in identifying, anomalies, and both sets, both the AI and the people, identified what appeared to be geometry. And so they then said, well, the AI must be kind of malfunctioning, because it's like, well, it can't be. Yeah, this is it. Yeah, sorry. AI saw on Ceres structures of artificial origin. I thought it was coming up on Soul Ask on one website. But they show this. Yes, so sorry, it's a circle inside a square inside a triangle. And that's in one of those glowing spots in that crater. Okay? Now, for any kind of reasonable person, at that point, you would say, well, surely we need to look at that as being a potential technosignature. That's not it there. Sorry, I have to. If you look for another glowing spot, try the AI. If you put circle square triangle AI, because it was an AI that found it. If you scroll down a bit, I think you probably find it. There was. Series. It's a really cool one. So I hope you can find it. But it's got it really that's it. Yeah. There you go. Right. So the AI and the human volunteers all saw in that a circle, a square, and a triangle. Right. And when we sort of factor that in, that's in one of those glowing spots. It's in that central glowing spot. You can see there. That in the middle of that is this what seems to be a geometric pattern. Okay, which is the alchemical symbol, right? So it's an alchemical symbol recognizable on Earth, okay? And that just turns out to be inside a glowing spot on the crater on this dwarf planet in what looks almost like a weird glowing map of some solar system somewhere. Now, I'm not saying that is aliens, right? But if you were looking for technosignatures and you're looking for visitation, wouldn't you think that was interesting and you'd want to send some more probes?
I'd be a good place to put a marker somewhere no one can touch it or mess with it, right on the moon, and a big glowing spot. And
a big glowing spot. And so why wouldn't that make scientists say, we need to launch a mission to Ceres? Right?
Well, they're probably saying that. They just aren't saying it publicly. And it's, you know what I mean? They're like, all right, we're going to go look at this
Quite
spot,
possibly.
but we can't let anybody know the real mission or what's really
No,
going
quite
on.
possibly. And again, that's that sort of bit of that mix of timidity and cover up. But I mean, it's quite possible something like that. Or again, that scientists don't want to put their necks out. So instead of saying this is super interesting and we need to explore it, they say, oh, the AI must have gone wrong and the people are just seeing things. And
Pareidolia.
and that this is probably just minerals that are glowing, reflecting light, and that there's probably nothing there. Move along. Nothing.
I mean, it might be just mundane explanations. So you don't
right.
know. So
Instead
I'm
of sending
totally
the
open to
probe
that
and finding
too.
out, considering we have a very short list of things that they're working on to find aliens, that would seem worth doing, isn't it? Because at the moment they're not really doing anything other than exploring Mars, right? And then so if you find something that's odd like that, why not task a probe to go there? Innit? It's that thing of why not? Because it's not like they're weighed down with technosignatures, right? They have basically none in their official list at the moment, right? So if they find one like that, where the AI has said, yes, it's detected what seems to be a geometric pattern on this alien world, like, well, isn't that like the red flag to go and have a look? So I think there's definitely an issue there that people have to think about. Like, yeah, why wouldn't you then go and take a look closer and validate whether or not that is artificial? So I think this is this problem we have where these things are overlooked, that nobody's really... Again, I think the Tektite signature, is overlooked. I think this, again, gives an example of how scientists can overlook something by just dismissing it. That we have probably the same thing happening again and again, and there may be, other signatures, both chemical signatures, as you suggested. We've got some very strange material. There's the sky stone, which was found in Africa a few years back, this blue material that material scientists analysed it, and they said they can't decide whether it's natural or artificial. If anyone's sort of familiar with that, the sky stone. And that the guy that's got the material, he sent me some papers and stuff on that and the studies and stuff. And basically, at the moment, no one can tell whether it's natural or artificial. And it's just this really weird blue stone. So, and top geologists have analysed it, and they cannot conclude what it is, like in terms of how it formed, what it is really, what it is. And that could be, from some kind of unknown technological process. So the sky stone is, again, it's another one of these things that's kind of been put into the dumpster, the science dumpster, things that are a bit weird. We're not sure what it is. We're not sure what to do about it. Almost like move on, and nothing more happens with it. But I don't know what that could be from. But again, it's the fact that nobody does should make it really a target for this kind of technosignature research. Anytime you stumble on something that nobody can conclude what it is, and it's implicitly strange, then we should be throwing all our efforts at those things. So that's another one. I think the UFO thing now, to me, is a bit of a red herring thing, because if we're going to say we want to know what's really out there. We want to know. We've got the UFOs, we've got the UAP thing. But the problem is, that nearly all UFO, UAP, whatever you want to call it, events. Well, first of all, we know that most of them are totally mundane. Okay, so we sort of skip the thing that 95% of UFO reports are mundane things, right? So we're just talking about anomalous phenomena, right? So anomalous aerial phenomena is what I would call it.
Yeah, I'm not so much as interested in UFO. I think there's nothing actionable to learn there. I'm much more like this because it's tangible, hard, science, and we have.
Thank you. Yeah, that's how I feel. I think that it's a red herring because you can put a lot of money and effort into chasing that. It's almost like ghost chasing, isn't it? That paranormal investigation type stuff where, look, that's been going on a long time and we haven't resolved anything about ghosts. So, are we really going to throw all our effort into what is going to be that kind of spooky chasing the weirdness, which we know can go on for freaking centuries without really taking you anywhere because you can't get hold of the ghost? It's always just beyond reach. And that's the UFO. It's always just beyond reach, right?
Yeah.
So it might be there's something.
It's a limited
there.
hangout. It's a good place for it's a safe place for the Pentagon to just and Harvard and these guys to just like, hey, this is what ufology is all about, guys. So just
and they come up with the terms. They gave us the terms UFO and UAP because they're super vague.
Yeah.
They allow you to make really strong statements that don't mean anything.
Yep.
Like UFOs are real.
UFOs.
Right? Strong statement. People are like, oh my God, they said it's real. But what does that mean? What is a UFO? It's just something you didn't identify. And yes, of course they're real. It doesn't make any sense. It's only if in people's heads, they have a separate definition to what the guy who's saying it has. Right? So the politicians can say absolutely anything. The military can say anything because they can always say, I didn't mean what you thought I meant. And that's the brilliant thing about these terms that don't mean anything. So you've got UFO and UAP, doesn't mean anything. Unidentified aerial phenomena can be anything. A cloud, I didn't know what that cloud was, is an unidentified aerial phenomena, right?
Yeah.
An aeroplane is a UFO if I don't know what it is. We know that this is a massive problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's that. I don't think it's going to take people anywhere. I know that people don't like me saying that, but I just don't think it's going to take people anywhere. I think it's such a nebulous topic, and it is like chasing ghosts. It doesn't matter how many millions they throw at that, unless you've got someone like, say, Avi Loeb and his team. What they're looking at doing is building sensor equipment, right, to look for anomalies in the sky, and it's a bit like what UAPX are doing and stuff. Is the idea is you field equipment to look for anomalous phenomena in the atmosphere.
Here's the video
Like that I can support.
I show this video to everyone who talks about, UFOs and saying that they're aliens. They have the technology. They should have metamaterial invisibility cloaking technology. So these things are going to be invisible if they're real aliens. Like, go watch the Star Trek episode "Who Watches the Watchers," and it makes more sense to me that if these things are alien out there, then they're definitely not. They're definitely not. The things that we're seeing are not aliens, man. They'd be hidden. Unless they want you to see them, then they're not going to turn off their invisibility cloaks to let us see them, and show themselves. So I think a lot of this stuff is we're seeing is our own technology and stuff.
Yeah, our own technology, and I think a lot of it as well is a poorly understood psychical or psychological process in the human mind, probably interrelating with some kind of energies, a phenomenon we don't understand that is terrestrial, that causes us to have these kind of going into trances and seeing really weird stuff. Because, most of these accounts, if you listen to what people say, is that they were there, 1 minute, then there was a big gap of time, and during the experience, all of the sound was cut out. Like all the bugs, the wind, the cars, they didn't hear anything. They just saw all this stuff. So if you think about it, if you went into a visionary state where what you're seeing is no longer external reality, the sound cutting off is absolutely what you'd expect, because the imagery is not being generated by the external world anymore. In that period where you lost time, you're having some kind of visionary internal experience that looks like the real world, but the sound isn't getting in anymore. So that's why the car sounds stop, the bug sounds stop, the wind stops, because that part isn't being replicated in your visionary experience. And I think that's really important, because if you could still hear the birds, you could still hear this thing, that's real, like we call real world stuff. Why does the real world stuff stop if you're still in the real world? So why is it the visionary stuff continues? Stuff that your mind could easily be generating for you, or could be put into your mind. And that's not to say that this is you doing this. If something is hacking your brain and is projecting imagery into the brain, now whether that's human technology or alien technology or some kind of energy that causes this, I can't tell you. But if something is hacking the frontal cortex, right, and giving you visionary experiences, the only way you'd know it's not objective reality is that loss of sound, because it's not going to replicate. It's got a story for you, and that story didn't have the bird noises and stuff in it. It's just the alien standing there talking to you and doing all this stuff, and then you come back, and then suddenly you can hear the birds again, you can hear the cars, because you weren't in the objective world in that experience.
So
something is happening to those people.
I mean, I've waken up from dream. You've been in that dream state where you're kind of somewhat awake, and you hear stuff going on in your environment that enters into your dream, like someone will say something in the or something. Yeah. So not all dreams are silent. I mean, sometimes we do hear.
In fact, the dream is more permeable than these experiences, which again is weird, isn't it? So why aren't you hearing the birds? So there's something there where I think your brain is switching. And again, I'm not saying this couldn't be aliens, but the fact is, it's not what you think. The alien isn't standing there. The spaceship hasn't landed in front of you. There isn't an alien coming towards you. That is happening just for you and for whoever's been locked into that experience with you. If someone else drove past, they might just see 3 people standing in a field staring into space.
Yeah.
Right?
Because it's all being deemed.
Right, because something's being done to you. A bit like the sort of psychotronic warfare, microwave weaponry, this kind of stuff, right? And I know this one, these Havana syndrome type stuff, which they're overlapping now with UFO experiences, right? That recently they said that the people who supposedly had Havana syndrome had the same brain injuries or whatever, and the brain changes as UFO experiencers, right? So is something being projected into the brain, right, in these experiences? And if so, by whom? By us, by an aliens, or just by some radiation we don't understand? I don't know, but I do not think that those are spaceships landing and beings going out and talking to people. I don't think that is happening at all in terms... I'm not going to say it's never happened, but when you start putting those bits together, and they found there was some people down in Hawaii had their brains scanned, and they all believed that they'd had implants put in their heads, right, by aliens. And what the guy found was that they all had some kind of anomaly, almost like a neural scarring, in the frontal cortex that handles visionary experience and auditory experience. So almost like the scar of having your brain hacked and having something projected into your head, right? So in that very area that processes that information, they all had the same anomaly, right? So that to me suggests that they didn't have any implant, but that something had happened to their visionary and their auditory cortex, right? So that would fit very nicely with it if this is being projected into their brains. And so it's impossible for them to tell that this isn't real. Because how do you tell? Real is what's happening in your head, right? Like, there's no way. If I could beam into your head, you know, a 3D immersive experience of you being on an alien spaceship, you're going to really struggle to know that I'm beaming that into your head, right? Like, how the hell do you know if there's the technology to do that? How are you going to tell that from your objective reality? Unless you're willing to say, this is so extraordinary, I don't think it's real, that someone's doing this to me. But most people don't think that. They just experience it. They're like, oh my God, I'm on an alien ship. And I totally understand why, because there's no way for them to tell it any different until you start looking broader at this and you start thinking, well, hang on, there's cases where people say have been abducted and their partner says that they were in the bedroom all night. Stuff like that they never left the room, but they say they flew through the wall and were on the spaceship. Well, they didn't, did they? Because people were there and they know they didn't, right? So what's happening to those people, right? They're having that experience there in the bedroom that they were abducted. So I know there's cases where people are found in the woods and stuff like that, and it seems they were taken out of their houses, but there's a lot of cases where they didn't go anywhere and they had those same experiences. So I would say that people have to rein in the idea that this is all spaceships landing all the time and these aliens are everywhere, just landing everywhere, every night, talking to people. You know, like you think about it, it's like a circus of these aliens, right? And I think John Keel said there was pretty much an alien spaceship and a monster for each of us because there were so many different ones that in these cases. I mean, now there's a lot of greys, but there used to be so many different shaped spaceships, so many different aliens that is absurd. It was like a circus of these beings. Like, why would we have thousands of different alien races here? Like, I mean, even if you accept aliens are here, it starts getting a bit extraordinary if it's thousands of them, different ones from different planets.
Yeah, right. No, this is interesting stuff. Yeah, here's the Michael Schratt's UFO shape chart. Yeah, with all the tons of different shapes that have been cited since the 1940s and earlier. Yeah, the brain scan thing was cool. It's a good hypothesis that maybe they didn't actually have these experiences, that these were the results of, beamed. I think of it like we have the microwave auditory effect. That's something we know about. We can beam voice of God technology into people's eardrums, right into their skull. So I just think of the simplicity of radio, and then a couple years later, a couple decades later of advancement, and then we have television. So think of the step of sending signals, radio signals over the air, to sending television signals over the air, and just the technology level the gap that it took to get there. Maybe we could send visual signals to the optical front of the optical cortex or something like that.
Yeah, and the other weird thing as well is that people that take psychedelics, particularly like ayahuasca and stuff, see the same beings and the same spaceships, right? They see reptilians, greys, Nordics. They see all these things in what are definitely psychedelic visionary experiences. Why are the same beings turning up in those visionary experiences in flying saucers, right? As are supposedly landing in people's gardens. Doesn't that red flag to people that there's something else happening there? This is more complex, because if these are just purely physical, objective aliens coming from space, why have shamans been seeing them in their visions for centuries when they take ayahuasca? Right? Doesn't that start sounding like there's a strong psychical element to what's happening?
Maybe you can beam something in this, and they have this experience on their own, and this is just, it's very similar. This is all good stuff, man. I like this.
So that's why I think, again, I think the UFO thing is interesting, but not for the same reasons most people think. I don't think it's going to lead us to contact with aliens, or that it's going to give us any objective evidence of aliens.
Yeah.
I think that if we looked at it properly, it will teach us something about us, something about how the brain works, maybe something about advanced psychotronic weapons, and probably a lot about unknown terrestrial phenomena, maybe radiation and things that we don't understand. And that there's probably a lot in that topic, and phenomena like ball lightning and stuff, which is totally anomalous. Again, when people say, oh, it could just be ball lightning. Ball lightning is totally anomalous. So, I mean, this is an area that's full of anomalous stuff that, it's definitely worth scientists going into the topic, but knowing at the beginning that they shouldn't go into it looking for proof of aliens, right? Because if they do that, they're probably not going to take us anywhere. If they go into it and say, could we look for, strange phenomena that might be, otherworldly, interdimensional, higher physics, something like that, then that would help. Ball lightning is really fascinating because, and again, people were saying that, couldn't these crafts, people see these orbs flying around, couldn't it be ball lightning? And you think that's an answer, but then when you look into ball lightning, nobody understands what it is. And it often appears completely disconnected to thunderstorms. So, unlike lightning, which has to be connected to a thunderstorm, ball lightning can just fly in from nowhere into your house, fly through the wall, fly around, It can even touch people, and you'd think it'd kill you instantly. You'd imagine it, oh my God, this is just going to burn you alive. But sometimes it passes people, touches them, but burns a hole maybe in the glass or something, but not in a wall, or it explodes. Sometimes causes a lot of damage. Sometimes causes no damage. So it's a super weird phenomena that nobody understands. They don't know if it's anything to do with lightning. Some people think it's a plasma phenomena. That's not proven. It's a popular hypothesis. Could ball lightning be intelligent? Right?
Yeah.
Could ball lightning be an intelligence from somewhere else? Why not? We don't know, because we don't know what it is, right? So when people sort of just say it's just ball lightning, that's one of the funniest things in ufology is the idea that, well, you shouldn't just dismiss it as ball lightning. Hang on, ball lightning's super weird. Like, that's not explaining anything. And another one that's interesting as well, swamp gas. And this is something I stumbled on, where people say, you can dismiss some of these UFOs as swamp gas. Swamp gas apparently is actually, there's no explanation for why it would burst into flames. They said so it doesn't explain seeing lights anywhere. So it's quite inert in terms of if it's just bubbling up. What lights the swamp gas, right? So some of these things that they have in the topic, which are just thrown in as explanations, don't make any sense. Ball lightning is not an explanation. Swamp gas doesn't make any sense. It's not. So, some of these really basic things, I think it's kind of funny that most of us would have no awareness that they're not even explanations in themselves, that they're further mysteries and anomalies that are not explained. And I think that, the ball lightning is a whole field that really needs a lot more effort in it. I mean, maybe ball lightning is an intelligence, another, an interdimensional intelligence that's flying into people's houses and exploring. I mean, it's amazing that we just write it off and say, oh, well, that's ball lightning. Like, what's ball lightning then? Like, how does it form? Where's it coming from? Why does it fly into people's homes? Why does it act as if it's seeing things? It can explore your house and then fly out the window and stuff. I mean, that's really odd.
Yeah, like I said, I think this laser plasma research might explain some of these UFO sightings. They look very similar to these, laser-induced plasma technologies and stuff. Mm-hmm. So, and a lot of people don't know about this technology. They'll say, "Oh, is it birds?" They'll say all the other UFO explanations, but they don't talk about these types of technologies, which they're rare. But if you have a bunch of lasers set up, that you could, like at the air show at Buckingham Palace, there was one of these balls, these orbs that traveled across the thing. Multiple angles filmed it and everything, right. And I think it could very well have been, the military over there showing off, some of this technological capability with regards to these types of things.
The orb side, definitely, people should be very careful in terms of that. We have technologies in the background that, like, as that can do projected voice into orbs and stuff. That they were even years ago they were going to do that. Have an orb flying around that could talk to you. Stuff like that, or projecting direct to your head, voice to skull, where you could have what seemed like a telepathic conversation with some being, but that would be them projecting into your head. And so if you combine some of these, if you combine either the orbs or like a holography with voice to skull, you could have some quite mad experience where someone was really believing that they're in contact with like a light being, that's telepathically speaking to them, with that being all using known technologies.
Or a ghost, right? Or a werewolf, or a dino beaver.
Yep, even a dino beaver, potentially. I like the dino beaver. He's one of my favourite characters in modern ufology.
Yes, yes.
So, I mean,
too,
it is. I mean, that's why I think it's difficult, isn't it? Because we're dealing with. We live in a time when people have been fantastically dumbed down, and that suits the system we live in. I mean, that's sad, but it's true. As I think it was, I'm trying to think of that, the astronomer that he warned, didn't it, that if we didn't, I'm trying to think of the guy's name now. It's kind of
Carl Sagan, right?
Carl Sagan, yeah, he warned, didn't it, that if we didn't keep the education level up to where the technology was, that we would fall so vulnerable to being manipulated, taken over, and just ruined by the powers that do understand these technologies. And that's exactly what's happened. We've allowed it to happen.
What did you say? I'm distracted.
Yeah, we're losing that war. We're losing that war where technology now is being employed against us that most people have no understanding of, don't even know it exists, and no comprehension of the effects, and very few people really get it. And this is a massive problem, and that you can convince people. Also, the UFO thing is a classic of it, but you can convince people of aliens, of transdimensional things, of werewolves, and that you can do all this with technologies, and that we are now
QAnon and the whole. Oh my God! They convinced all those people to and everything that happened too, like that, the January 6th, and you can convince people that an election was stolen, or lots of things.
We're very vulnerable, really, to the employment of technologies, particularly in combination with online, obviously, information, but combined with strange events, things done to people, manipulation of people, like mind control weaponry, obviously MK Ultra type employment of weaponry. I think that we are in a very vulnerable position, and that this UFO thing is heading into that area.
2 years ago was the culmination of it for me, and you lost a lot of followers during the last 2 years for some of your reviews and stuff.
Yeah.
And you just look at everything that's coming out, and I laugh at everyone that was saying trust the science. No, never trust the science. Always question the science. Otherwise we still be blowing smoke up people's asses to save drowning victims.
Yeah.
And if it's all it just shows that whole gap in all this, with the new age of science is you create something that sounds credible, and it's just like a whole new age of psyops, man. It's we live in just a psyopt world where most of our reality is controlled by 5 people that run all the media, and all the mainstream news, and have literally locked down control over what information people are seeing. And in fact that when we're alternative people are continuously being shadow banned and taken out of the algorithms, and for speaking out and saying things, they're continuously removed from this bigger picture, and it's kind of it's disgusting and crazy what's going on.
It is, and also the UFO field is just so open to stuff like that happening, which is it's particularly risky. We can see now this progression of the narrative with the military and the government moving more and more into the UFO topic, and that is a field that is so open for psyops, and it is historically been utilized for testing psyops and testing technologies against people, and for testing psychological warfare on people, because it's a vulnerable group. It's people that are mostly open to extraordinary things, or who have experienced things that were extraordinary, so therefore are more open to them happening. So if you're going to test something odd or new, novel on a group, those people claiming to have had extraordinary experiences or open to extraordinary experiences, they're a prime target to roll it out on.
Absolutely,
and also,
I agree.
And people enabling each other, supporting each other to believe things, and then you have a history of military involvement. Loads of the people that are relied on in ufology are former military, a lot of them former intelligence. Throughout the history of ufology, from the beginning, it starts off with the stories with military witnesses of alien crashes, but military people are the bulk of some of these early witnesses. Right, and then we see ex-intel and scientists from the military projects are always involved in ufology the whole 70 years. And people are often reliant on people that are former senior military or intelligence or advanced experiments in psychological warfare. So, people coming out of these black projects straight into ufology. I mean, It's so open to this. It's psychological warfare against people. It's just so open to it. And this idea that we should put the trust in these people because they had involvement in it. So therefore, they're good sources.
Yeah.
It's like, you might want to rethink that because they're also the people that are most likely to be scamming you, or to be testing stuff on you. I'm not saying they all are, but you should be very wary.
I'm very wary of anyone that gets, continuously, makes a post that is meaningless and has no evidence, but yet reaches, tens and hundreds of thousands of people seemingly organically, but it's totally not because, I have an organic channel. I built up 100,000 subscribers over, 17 years of doing this, and I still don't get those kind of views because of the shadow ban and the algorithms and stuff. So you see people come out with absolute garbage and just jump to the top of search results, get the news stories get picked up, and then get invited on mainstream news channels to talk about this.
Yeah.
You know how many mainstream news people I've reached out to and just absolutely blown their mind with the amount of content and material I have, and they're just they tell me like, we can't have you on, like this.
I understand. I've had conversations with journalists and stuff, and I've had conversations with journalists, and we've sat here and you've listened to what I'm saying. I'm not the first part of what we've talked about with the Tektite stuff. I think most people agree there was nothing woo in that. I mean, it's evidence from NASA files and stuff. But if I try and talk to journalists about that, what normally happens is they vanish after the initial conversations. And then they just go silent and they vanish. And that's I've had none of them that have said, let's run an article on this. Right? Even though there's more evidence for what I'm saying than any of the UFO stories, any of the alien stories that are out there. I'm saying, like, look, we've got the material, we've got material analysis by top scientists. Everything I'm saying is in papers, right?
The thing is, it took us like almost 2 hours to get over all the arguments and the material because there's all the counter arguments that come up and all the other explanations that people. We had to spend so much time just to go through each one of those things.
Exactly, right? But then what they'd rather put is Johnny saw a light in the sky and it was amazing, and that would get in the paper. If I say, well, look, you've got the material science done, we've got the physics, you've had the NASA guys, and it's like, great, and then I never hear from them again. Yep. The only one that said they tried to run it was a journalist from The Sun, which they said they went to their editor after I spoke about an hour or something on the phone, and the editor said, well, unfortunately, our readers are basically too dumb to understand this.
Yeah.
And I thought that's kind of like sad thing to say. I don't really agree with that. So I think there are people that, obviously their readership, they're not going for highbrow. I understand that. But I mean, that's kind of sad, isn't it? That it wasn't that they didn't think it was real. It wasn't they didn't believe it. It was they thought the readers were too stupid to understand it.
That's it. Everything's got to be like 5th grade level for them to really bring it across.
Cable TV's like that too. I've had conversations with producers, and I'm sure you know this. I've talked to people in production companies who've said, look, Bruce, we have to target a like grade 12 level or something, and what you're trying to explain, it's really like science.
Grade 12, that's a little high from
yeah. I mean, it's amazing, though, because people don't really realise that. So they'll say, well, we have to pitch that to the networks, and the networks want it to be accessible to everyone from kind of school level. They're not really wanting it to be technical information, so this is a bit too technical. And it's like, if it was just me saying, I see lights in the sky all the time, there'd probably be like a 12-part show by now about Bruce sees lights in the sky, and it'd still be, going on. But because I'm trying to actually argue using like solid science and academic papers, that's the world we live in. I mean, it's a sad, people don't really think about that. I think, so if you try and use the science, they don't want to hear from you.
Yeah, it's crazy, but they'll give you airtime if you're dressed as a drag queen dancing in front of kids.
All sorts of stuff now you can get.
It's just so ridiculous, man. The
all sorts of stuff.
Idiocracy is no longer a film; it's a documentary.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if this, will change anytime soon. The way I look at it is, we probably need to go through some kind of paradigm shift. I think most people can understand that if that happens, like a cultural shift, then probably things like work you're doing, material sciences, and things that I'm looking at, that may then go to the foreground in some of these topics. And that, other people like UAPX, who are doing some science, and the Galileo project, that might start to get real attention, globally.
Yeah.
But at the moment, that's kind of inconvenient to a more dumbed down version
Well,
of
we got some people
research.
here that are right on this level, man. I'm sure there's someone out there watching that already went on eBay and bought a couple Tektites and is going to go test these things. And people that already saw the thing on Carbonado diamonds and bought a bunch of Carbonados and are testing those and other
Good.
stuff.
Yeah.
Apparently, there's this whole there are these opals that look like the galaxy stones from Men in Black, where they have like all the stars inside them. It's called like these star opals or galaxy opals that are found in Central African Republic near this deposit. And there's a lot of interesting witch doctor stories about that area where these materials come from. So there's tons of cool stuff to explore here, and like I said, some people were saying, oh, this sounds like Science Channel or History Channel level stuff. And I know that you've been on Science and History Channel, right?
Yeah.
So
I guess it's more than Nat Geo, but they've never spoken to me. So maybe needs a documentary on Nat Geo about these events of 788,000 years ago. I mean, I have thought, to be honest, I mean, I don't want to backtrack. I know we've gone quite a long time already, but I mean, there was a lot of things that happened 780,000 years ago where it should already be like a Nat Geo special, because at that same period, so not only do we know that there's this glassy material raining from the sky, we also, again, this is established stuff, we also know that there's multiple asteroid impacts at that time in different places, including the one I mentioned to you, which seems is almost, well, it's not 100% confirmed, but that something went into the ice, something really big. Also, that's the last time we had a full magnetic reversal, was 780,000 years ago. So the planet's field reverses at that time, and the genetics suggest that's when Homo sapiens begins to diverge. Like Denisovans, Neanderthals start to diverge from our ancestor. There's a lot of stuff going on in one time, and it could not be a show already. Like, even if you forget about alien technosignatures, why am I having to learn this from some weird, wacky research I ended up getting involved with, right? Instead of hearing about that stuff on a mainstream kind of documentary, because most of those things, they're extraordinary in themselves. I mean, like a multi-directional asteroid impact event happened at that time, with impacts in Central America, parts of Asia, Tasmania, and if you look for that, there's an article from, it was a German university team in 2015, found evidence of a multi-directional asteroid event at that same time as this dripping glass, the asteroid thing in Antarctica, the magnetic shift. Doesn't that flag to you like that something really odd is going on at that time? Like, even if you forget aliens, these like mega events, world-changing events. And I found this out through some sort of back door where I'm looking into these but I hadn't heard it. So I was looking into a narrative I'd heard about a possible contact event someone had, which suggested some of this stuff had happened. And then I found about all these different things, right? But I'm surprised that isn't a show in itself. Like, 780,000 years ago, the time that changed the world or something, with comets and freaking reversals and
pole shifts and
pole shifts. It's like this is like
hominid
should be a show.
migrations.
Yeah, why isn't that a show already? And then glass dripping from the sky, and I don't know. That felt kind of odd too. When the more I started to realize what's going on at that time, it was like, why haven't I heard of this? Why am I finding out an obscure research that I'm doing instead of that already being a show or something? It's kind of.
I tell you what, we're going to keep doing this. I've been doing it a long time. Our time's coming. It might take another decade, but I swear, like all the history channels and shows, there's going to be a million shows about all this stuff. Like, and I always talk about it. The day they roll that TR-3B out, the U.S. Air Force brings that thing out of a hangar. I'm gonna be getting calls off the. And my phone's just gonna be ringing off the hook. So hopefully some people saw you here tonight or today, depending on where they are in the world, and hopefully you get some cool people reaching out to you. Where can people get a hold of you and contact you or find more of your research or things? Bruce R. Fenton. It's Bruce R. Fenton.
Yeah, they can go to brucerfenton.com. There's a bit of a bio about me and a couple of articles. As you know, I'm mainly active on Twitter in terms of social media. So if someone wants to follow me or interact with me there.
Yeah, Twitter is a good place to get you. Exogenesis on Twitter.
So they look for Exogenesis HH. It's like for Hybrid Humans. It's my book name. I have a book, Exogenesis Hybrid Humans, and another book, The Forgotten Exodus, The Inter-Africa Theory of Human Evolution.
Yeah.
That book's got a foreword by Graham Hancock. The Exogenesis book has got a foreword by Eric von Daniken. So they're both really cool because, I mean, for those subject areas, obviously those are the most notable people that I could get to do a foreword. So that was really cool. So you can also find, I'm on Facebook and stuff, but to be honest, I use Twitter mainly. So you're better off, following me there, and you can message me there.
You got a book too, right? Oh, so you got Exogenesis, Hybrid Humans. Yeah. So Oh, sorry. You just mentioned your book. I'm sorry. I wanted to bring it up, but
the other one, the older one, is out of print. So when you see that crazy price, that's because it's an out of print book, and somebody is selling it for that. I mean, I don't sell it for $190. So.
Man, I got to get you back on. I can't believe we almost did through 2.5 hours, and I feel like I have so much more I want to sit and talk to you about, maybe, including a lot of other stuff, man. We should do like a whole nother separate stream for different conspiracies and other stuff, man. Because I agree with you on a lot of the debate points that we've been railing on Twitter and other sites. So thank you so much. This has been an amazing show. Bruce R. Fenton, not to be confused with the other Bruce Fenton, who is a Bitcoin expert and running for Senate. Guys, anything else you want to conclude with?
Yeah, only for people to, I would encourage everyone, with what's happening in the UFO field, just to be very cautious, to use your critical thinking, step back and just coolly watch what's going on. And I would say, follow people like the Galileo Project, UAPAX, obviously yourself and myself, and people that are offering a more scientific and technical analysis of some of these topics. Just be wary. I think we're living in extraordinary times. I'm quite happy for people, to contact me if they have some evidence or something, or a query on this, or something they want to ask me about from what we've said today. Again, probably through Twitter is the best thing. If they can email me. I have an email, bruce@brucefenton.info. But probably the best conversation is on like Twitter, because I'm sort of often there in real time. But other than that, if they want to buy the books, it's great. It's it's not life-changing money. So if people say, "Oh, you do this for books," I don't get a lot. I mean, if people understand royalties, it's not a lot. I mean, I wrote the books because it saves explaining your theories again and again to people. I'm not J.K. Rowling, so I'm not going to make billions. I understand I'm not going to make billions out of books, but they're kind of helpful for that. So I just say that, I don't push them particularly. I say that just because I know people sometimes say, "Oh, people write these books to make millions of dollars." It's like, I know a lot of authors in these fields, and I can tell you that they're not making millions of dollars. That it's a niche field where you'd be very lucky to be able to live from writing. Unfortunately.
Yeah. No, especially when you're writing about true things, it seems like the fiction, like the Harry Potter, make more money in terms of writing and stuff. So I totally get that. Way more.
Honestly, I think it's probably only 2 or 3 authors that actually have done very well out of, kind of aliens and UFOs. I don't think there's many. There's a couple of people. I think it's an unfair thing that people get accused of, is that you're trying to profiteer from these topics. It's like,
there comes the book. There comes the book.
To be honest, one book I think will do very well, and where the accusation might be fair, is in Elizondo's upcoming book, because he has had global attention through the media from like all the mainstream media platforms. I expect it to be the best-selling UFO book of all time. I mean, I'd be really shocked if he doesn't sell millions of copies. So if anyone wants to accuse anyone of maybe looking to make a lot of money out of the topic, that's the only person I think is going to make a lot of money out of a UFO book.
Oh, he can't talk about anything. It's all under NDA, and he can't speak about it or anything. So I don't know what the heck he's going to write a book about.
I'm not sure either.
There's a book of stuff I can't talk about.
All I know is that he's had such a big media platform that I'd be surprised if that book doesn't generate a lot of money.
Yeah, well, he's the CIA's counterintelligence mouthpiece, so I'm not surprised. I don't know. I have my own opinions and thoughts on Elizondo, and the fact that he won't come on any show that disagrees with him or at once would dare ask him like real serious questions about anything.
Yeah, I mean, again, I let that story just play itself out and just watch. I don't get too much into these arguments. Yeah, it's better to stay in the background,
man. I've lost so many followers and friends just from people like, how could you say that about Lou? And I can't. It's just too much. You know what I mean? Because they're all this opinion that he's the savior and
Don't-
he's gonna come save everyone and he's the hero, and you can't fight the hero, man. You can't like.
No, and to be fair as well, I don't even, and as other people say, it's not even so much him, that they've decided to be like that, the followers, and that's, I think, is sad in a way that people become so aggressive. I can't say that he's told them to do that either,
It's the
but
same
that
thing
seems
with
to
Bob
be
Lazar.
just...
Bob Lazar doesn't tell his fans to go crazy, but he's, it's the same thing with the Bob Lazar story, which I've gone over. And
people become very aggressive about it because they feel quite invested personally into the stories, into the narratives.
I was for years, man, and I believed it. And I used to like argue with people about certain things in the story until I really met some key people and learned the ins and outs of it and what's really going on. The Bob Lazar timeline was really a one that did it for me, putting it all in perspective and other stuff. But yeah, it's the same kind of thing, man.
All of these big cases in the UFO and aliens field is similar, isn't it? That they all have die-hard kind of inner circle of followers and people that know them and influencers that big up their stuff, and then they have there's quite aggressive responses if you question these stories. I mean, everything, even the more recent cases that have been made into documentaries. Obviously, you've got things like the aerial school case. If you question some of these cases, people get really upset. But I mean, you should question every case as much as you possibly can. I mean, that should be it. I mean, because otherwise you don't get to the truth by wanting to believe. Like I said, the easiest person to fool is yourself. And we should be very careful that we're not fooling ourselves in a lot of these cases because we want to believe, right? And that when we look a bit closer, we generally find that it's not as clear cut as this initial presentation of the stories are. And that goes for all of them from, Betty and Barney Hill to Aerial School to,
Travis
all
Walton,
of these cases.
Yeah,
The closer you look, if you're very skeptical on it, it doesn't mean the cases are entirely made up, but they are not as compelling and as conclusive as you often are led to believe at the beginning by the fans, the die-hard fans.
Yeah.
And then you look closer and you start to realize that there are inconsistencies. And again, that some of this stuff can not necessarily be not fake, but again has psychological or psychic elements or government manipulation elements. And that, so it doesn't mean they're not real. And that's the thing, is that people shouldn't get caught up on it being real or not real. It's more, is it the story you're being sold?
Hey,
that's why
even the thing that we even find that the history books and stuff that was taught in schools was wrong, because science overturned it with a new discovery. So people are fallible too, and including the people and men and women in our own military, and stuff too. So we're all learning. We're all trying to get to that better understanding. And man, I got to have you back on, Bruce. This is just. Let me know. We got to do this again in a couple months, man. This was an awesome show.
We'll get something sorted out. I mean, I really hope that that everyone's found it kind of interesting. I mean, sometimes I'll be honest. Obviously, I sit there and think, Tektites. It's such a obscure, technical topic. That I don't know how many people would be interested. Do you know what I mean? Even though I'm saying it indicates aliens, it is technical. I know that we've got to go through that, as you said, a lot of different counter arguments. A lot of the technical information. I know it's not for everyone, and it is kind of complicated.
Oh, my fans love this kind of stuff. They eat it right up. So we had about 170, 180 people watching at the top point, which is pretty good for this time of the day. Really
so
good.
They were interested. Yeah, that's good. I mean, because I understand that it's not going to be for everybody. That if someone just wants a story of lights in the sky, it's not like that. It's a thinking thing. You have to sit down and think. I can understand
that because you learn a lot in the process too. We talked about a whole bunch of stuff that someone not familiar with geology or meteorology and other stuff has now a whole bunch of search terms and things to look up and lots of research.
And that's the thing. Go away and check the stuff. That's the other thing, is that we live in an age where you can go away and you can access these papers. You can see if I'm making it up. I have got a paper that I've nearly finished that I will intend to put that on. Probably AOVX or something, like a preprint server, so that people can read it and we'll have the
That's
sources.
what I was calling AR zip, and then someone called it archive, and I thought he was talking about the Wayback Machine the other.
Something like
that.
I will put a paper up on there for people, so and that will have all the sources. But I mean, you can go. The things I've said, you can go away, look them up, find the papers where that will talk about those claims. If you
Yeah.
find, I just say to people as well, a little bit of a tip. If you're researching something like this, use Sci-Hub, like sci-hub.st is their current domain, because that will allow people to access academic papers without paying, and because some of these papers are behind paywalls. So
Yeah.
if anyone does want to check what I'm saying and that they find that they can't get through, then use Sci-Hub. Just put the DOI or the URL in there, and that will usually open the papers for you. And there's hundreds of Tektite papers, so you will find some that are open. You'll find some aren't, but most of the information is repeated across multiple papers. So if I say like Tektites are made mostly of silica, you'll find some papers that will tell you the composition of Tektites. They're available. If I'm saying about the buttons coming from space, you'll find some papers on that. It might not be the same one I look at, but you will find some papers. There's loads of papers on these topics. So any of it can be checked by anyone listening. There's nothing there that's coming from me. I didn't do any of my own, experiments, right? So there's nothing you can't find out there from the scientists that did the experiments and stuff, right? So I'm just reading their papers.
Heck yeah. I'm going to throw a bunch of links in the description as soon as this ends. And thank you all for watching and supporting this channel.
Thanks,
and
everybody. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Go follow Bruce on Twitter. Thank you guys for watching.
Thanks a lot. Take care.